Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 3 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. It helps out with the algorithm so much, and it only takes just a quick second. So if at any point you feel that this video is deserving of a like, please be sure to drop one. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post a video just like this one every Tuesday. I do have a new upload schedule. Like I said, I plan on posting every Tuesday. I'm hoping that all of them can be just as long as this one. I don't want to hold myself to it yet though. I want to see how things go and go from there. So they might be a little bit longer than this one, maybe a little bit shorter. We'll just have to see how it goes. I do want to say a quick thank you for all of the support and especially the patience. I know it's been like 2 weeks since my last video, and I said that I was going to be posting consistently again, and then I didn't. Like I said, I just want to say thank you for being so understanding and giving me time. You've all been extremely great. But yeah, I think that's all I have for you. Sit back, grab a coffee, pack a bowl, whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the video, tell someone you love them, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Holy crap! An unfamiliar voice called out. Is that you? I had been so focused on my GPS that I hadn't been paying attention to my surroundings. Not the wisest choice at midnight in an unfamiliar town. I looked up and saw her walking towards me. As I met her gaze, she smiled and began walking faster. I said nothing as she embraced me on the sidewalk, holding me for what felt like ages. When she finally let go, I mustered a quiet, "Hey," with a degree of fake enthusiasm that felt appropriate. She laughed. "How are you? I haven't seen you in so long." She spoke loudly, as if we weren't just inches apart. I paused as I studied her face, trying to remember how we knew each other. I'm usually pretty good with faces, and hers wasn't one I could easily forget. Her jet black hair, porcelain skin, and large brown eyes reflected the moonlight in a way that was eerily hypnotizing. She was roughly my age, if I had to guess, and absolutely gorgeous. "I've been good," I said, admittedly a little creeped out, but nevertheless entranced. "You know, same old, same old." She circled around behind me and placed herself to my right, locking her arm with mine. Without another word, we both started walking forward, synchronized in step. My heart pounded in my chest, due to an equal mix of unease and infatuation. She was petite and seemingly harmless, so I silently steadied my breath. Just as I was preparing to apologize for my poor memory and ask her where we had met, I saw them. On the other side of the street to my left were 2 young men leaning against a wall. They were tall and fit, dressed in pastel polo shirts and khaki shorts. Their dirty blonde hair and matching sharp jawlines suggested that they may have been brothers, but you could pluck any 2 jockish frat boys off the street in this town, and they would probably look pretty similar. Their eyes darted around deliberately, trying and failing to hide the fact that they were watching her. We continued walking forward, and in my periphery, I noticed that the 2 men did as well. Their pace was just barely slower than ours. When they were finally out of earshot, she spoke again. "I'm so sorry," she said, practically whispering. "I know this is super weird. I just left a party and these guys have been following me for like 2 miles. I would have called someone, but I must have left my phone at the house." "Don't be sorry," I said. "Have they said anything?" "Oh yeah," she chuckled. "All kinds of disgusting stuff. They've made their intentions pretty clear." Do you want me to call the cops? Can I just walk with you? She asked. I told her, of course, and we carried on for a minute in silence. I'm Lily, by the way. Sorry if I creeped you out back there. I didn't know what else to do. Tyler, and really, it's no problem at all. I'm just sorry you had to deal with that. You get used to it. She laughed again, this time more forced than the last. Nice to officially meet you, Tyler. A whistle sounded from behind us. I snapped my head to face our followers and shot them a dirty look in a feeble attempt to intimidate them. They could almost certainly see the panic in my face when I realized that they had crossed to our side of the street. The distance between us had become much shorter. So, she began, her voice wavering as she attempted a playful tone. Where are you headed on this fine Saturday night? Well, it's not exactly an exciting outing. My roommate accidentally used my toothbrush, so I was going to buy a new one from the corner store on Franklin. And you need your GPS for that? She smirked as she gestured to my phone. I stifled a laugh, still weary of the people creeping along behind us. I just transferred here from summer school. This town is kind of confusing, you have to admit. I'm kidding. I'm just looking forward to being surrounded by people. Maybe I can hang out in the store and wait for these two to screw off. I admired her ability to seem so nonchalant. I was secretly terrified, and I could only imagine how she felt. We rounded the corner to the shop. A knot formed in my stomach as I saw the dark storefront. A sign on the door read, "Due to short staffing, we will be closing nightly at 10 p.m. Sorry for the inconvenience." Crap. It said online that they're open all night. I said, I guess they couldn't afford a spell checker either. Lily didn't laugh. Summer hours, I guess. This place is a ghost town right now. As we stood planted in front of the store, one of the men behind us clicked his tongue with sarcastic pity and spoke in a raspy voice. You should go back where you came from, buddy. Lily squeezed my arm to preemptively silence me before I could speak. Don't, she said. They just want a reaction. The voice called out from behind us again. She'll make you think she wants you and then ruin your fucking night. She'll get what's coming to her. The two of them had stopped as well, just a few yards down the sidewalk from us. Although it was the middle of the summer, the air felt cold. I know this is weird, I whispered, but you can come back to my dorm if you want, just until it's safe. I don't think so, she said. I trust you, I really do. It's just, you said you have a roommate, and I think I've hit my quota for interacting with strangers tonight. I then offered to call an Uber, which she also refused. I'm worried that they'll get even more aggressive if we wait around. Let me walk back to your place then. She begrudgingly agreed, and we continued on our way. She apologized 3 more times for inconveniencing me, and reassured me that her dorm wasn't far away. The frat boys followed quietly in tandem as we made our way across the campus. When we arrived at the entrance to Carter Hall, Lily paused and glanced over her shoulder. I followed suit, and saw the two of them standing eerily still in the middle of the quad. They were much further away now, watching silently. You sure you don't want me to call anyone? I asked. Yeah, she said, biting her lower lip. But would you come inside with me until they leave? I'm scared to be alone. She reached out and stroked my arm. My heart raced once again. There was nothing I wanted more than to be alone in a dorm room with a girl like Lily, but I knew I couldn't relax with these creeps lurking nearby. I'm gonna go talk to them. As the words left my mouth, I thought I must have lost my mind. Please don't, she said. Best case scenario, they feed you a bunch of crap. Worst case scenario. She trailed off. and I didn't know how to respond. Deep down, I knew she was right. My mind considered all of the horrible things that might happen to me, but I couldn't shake my desire to confront them. I spun around with another word and marched across the grass to meet them. "Tyler!" Lily's voice called out behind me. I wanted to turn back and spend the night with her, but my legs just kept carrying me forward. I was on autopilot. As I neared the two men, they remained completely still, staring straight through me. "Hey," I shouted, doing my best impression of a confident man who could hold his own in a fight. "You guys need to get out of here." My voice cracked a little bit. One of them was significantly taller than the other, but they both towered above me. Now that we were within spitting distance, I saw that both of their shirts were soaking wet. The shorter of the two men turned his head ever so slightly to face me and opened his mouth. No words came out. Instead, he emitted a soft, unsettling gurgle. Then the taller man spoke. "You're out of your element, man." "I'm gonna call the cops." "The cops can't help you." He continued. "She knows what you want." The shorter man continued to gurgle. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. I was no longer trying to sound tough. I was afraid, and it showed in my voice. "She flirted with us all night. She said she'd never been with two guys at once before. She told us to meet her in the basement." He still stared beyond me, refusing to meet my gaze. "She had no right to do what she did, to leave us there like that." "She doesn't owe you anything," I said. "She owes us everything." I turned around and started back to the dorm entrance. The taller man called out to me once more. "If you go back to her, you're dead." "I'm not scared of you." I lied. As I made my way back to the door, I saw that Lily was nowhere to be found. I yanked on the door handle to no avail. Noticing the access card reader on the wall, I let out a sigh. I had missed my chance. I couldn't blame her, of course. It was stupid of me to confront them. I should have gone inside and called the cops, but of course I had to play the hero card. I glanced back to where they had been standing. The quad was empty and dead silent. I waited outside for a few minutes before shamefully making my way back to my own dorm. I'm embarrassed to admit that I faked a phone call the entire way, as an attempt to ensure my own safety. Fortunately for me, the guys were nowhere in sight. For the first time since I had met Lily, a wave of calm rushed over me as I entered the building and hurriedly shut the steel door behind me. Trudging up the stairs and down the hall to my cramped room, I made a last-ditch effort to search for her on every social media app I could think to try. No luck. I didn't even know her last name. My head barely touched my pillow when I drifted into a deep sleep, despite my crushing disappointment and my roommate's deafening snores. In what felt like the blink of an eye, I awoke to my roommate standing over me and jostling my shoulder. "Hey," he said. His eyes were wide, his demeanor noticeably frantic. "Did you know them?" He was shoving his phone in my face. Still half asleep, I struggled to focus my eyes. He and I had barely spoken to each other all summer. What could be so important that he felt the need to wake me up so urgently on a Sunday morning? "Know who? What are you talking about?" I asked, rubbing my eyes and sitting up on my elbows. "Dylan Gregory and Max Humboldt. Here." He shoved his phone even closer to my face. The picture on his phone screen became clear as I adjusted to the light pouring through our window. It was a photo of the creeps from last night standing in a field. They were wearing lacrosse uniforms and smiling ear to ear, their arms around each other's shoulders. Their jerseys were drenched in sweat. I felt a lump in my throat. Had something happened to Lily? I knew I should have called the cops. Kind of, yeah. I mean, not really. I just met them. I grabbed his phone from his hands to study the picture more carefully. Why? What's going on? It's been all over the news this morning. They were murdered this weekend at a house party. Real gruesome stuff. One of them had his throat slit. I know, it's callous, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for them after what I had witnessed. I mostly just felt relief that Lily was safe. Good riddance, I said. I saw those guys last night. They were total assholes. Probably had it coming. That's messed up, he said with a laugh. Nobody deserves that. Besides, it's not the same guys. How would you know? I asked. This party was on Friday. Their frat brothers found them in the basement last night. First responders said that they had been dead for over 24 hours. I stared at the picture again. A soft, gurgling sound filled my ears, growing louder and louder. When my roommate spoke again, it sounded like he was underwater. Hey, I'm sorry again about the toothbrush. Did you get a new one? Miss Lucy's opened last month across the street from my apartment. It's the only restaurant in town that serves fried zucchini, so I was in love from the start. Plus, the place looks amazing. The spherical glass building is designed so customers can look out, but no one can see inside. And it lights up and changes colors at night like an oversized disco ball. My balcony overlooks the entire restaurant, and I can even see the underground parking garage entrance in the back. But I've noticed something strange about Miss Lucy's. Not everyone who goes in comes out. One night, my buddies Cole, Steven, and I watched from the balcony as customers arrived. Hey, Will, do you think there's another exit? Cole asked. Doubt it. You can see everything from here. As far as I knew, there was one way in and one way out. Once I counted the incoming and outgoing traffic, and sure enough, 26 cars arrived between dinner and closing time, but only 7 left. There has to be a rational explanation. But what? Regardless, I was craving fried zucchini, so Steven and I stopped by one weeknight. After a quick trek across the intersection, we arrived. Inside, dance music played. Neon lamps and wall-to-wall aquariums lit up the room, and massive chandeliers hung above velvet lounge chairs and antique mirrors. Cool place, Steven said, but the hostess scowled when we approached. She had hawk-like eyes and a fierce perm. Her name tag read, Helga O. Are you on the list? She asked. What list? The list? I don't know. You have to be on the list to enter. We need reservations on a Tuesday? I glanced around, seeing no one but giant room dividers sectioned off the dining area, so I couldn't see how many people were there. No, you need to be on the list. I turned back to the surly hostess. Okay, can you put us on the list? No, that is not how we operate. You have to call at least 2 days before to put your name on the list. I can't just tell you my name and have you add it to the list now? No. Steven nudged me and whispered, Come on, man, let's go. But this lady wasn't going to ruin my plans. Okay, we'll be in touch. Forget this place, Steven said as we left. But I wasn't giving up, so I called the restaurant, and Helga answered right away. I'd like to put my name on your list. This time, Helga sounded professional and polite. Certainly, sir. For how many guests? Steven, me, Kiera, Layla, and Cole. 5. For which night? Friday. Your guests' first names, please? I gave her all 5 names. Very good. You're on the list. Give your server the password 4355 when you arrive. Friday night, Steven, Kiera, Cole, Layla, and I walked to Miss Lucy's from my place. Unfortunately, Helga O greeted us, but this time, Helga was all smiles. Yes, I see you're on the list. Your password, please? It's 4355. Perfect. Right this way. Then, when Helga pulled back the giant room divider and let us into the bar area, it felt like entering another world. Bright purple lights lit up the space, which looked 3 times larger than I'd imagined. There were wall-to-wall aquariums with tropical fish, massive flat-screen TVs, velvet lounge chairs, and a revolving bar. It looked like something in Vegas. I couldn't believe I lived across the street from this place. Dang, Cole said as we followed Helga up a spiral glass staircase into another room. The upstairs floor resembled a library, with large bookshelves and sofas. We were so enamored with the surroundings. We hardly noticed we were the only people there. We followed Helga all the way to the back until we reached a bookshelf against a brick wall. Then, Helga opened a book on the middle shelf and pressed a large button inside. As if on cue, the bookshelf crept open, revealing a spacious private dining room and bar. Unbelievable, Kiera said. Inside was a lit, translucent glass floor with a koi pond, and there were more chandeliers, mirrored tables, and velvet chairs, along with a private bar. We even had a private server. This is for all of us? I asked, my jaw dropping. The place looked like a cross between a 1920s speakeasy and an ultra-modern lounge, and with the ambient lighting, the space had an otherworldly feel. How much is this going to cost? Cole whispered. I shrugged. The online menu didn't look too expensive. Then again, I'd only check the fried zucchini price. Check out these seats, Layla said, running her hands along the black velvet chairs. Unbelievable, Kiera said, and check this out. The velvet seats and tables sat on a revolving platform that switched on and off. I've never seen anything like this, Steven said, playing with the switches. Helga switched off the revolving platform, motioned for us to sit, and handed us the menus. Your server will be with you soon. Then she handed me a mini pad. You can use this to customize your experience, she said, pointing to a text box. Type in your request in this box, and your server will send you a confirmation and an estimated delivery time. You can also change the music. She showed me a music library with tons of playlists, and we could even change the light colors. No way, Kiera said, pressing the buttons as the chandelier lights changed from white to green to red. Even the floor bulbs changed colors. Cole glanced around, taking it all in. Will, are you sure this place isn't expensive? I don't think so. Helga left, and the bookshelf door closed behind her, leaving us to enjoy our secret space. We opened the menus, but no prices were listed. That's strange. I grabbed the iPad and typed a note to the server. Where are the prices listed? After a moment, the server responded, they aren't. My buddies and I exchanged nervous glances. What does he mean? The prices aren't listed, Cole said. I typed, how much are the drinks? He wrote, 1 minute, but he never replied. What the hell? Cole asked. My heart raced. What did I get us into? What if this place is over the top expensive? My friends will kill me. I watched the iPad, waiting for the server to reply, but he never did. Minutes later, a man wearing a tuxedo arrived with a tray of cocktails and appetizers we didn't order. Chocolate martinis, Red Bulls, veggies, and hummus. And fried zucchini. Fried zucchini? I filled my plate. Cole nudged me. We need to see the prices first. I looked up at the server. Hey, could we please see the prices before we order more? But he didn't say a word. Sir? Cole started. But the server ignored him. Instead, he pulled out a list, but I couldn't see what was on it. Then the server walked over to the wall and flipped a switch. At that moment, the music stopped and the room went black. Even the iPad screen went dark. Someone gasped. What the hell? Steven said, nudging me. Hello? I said. Silence. Moments later, the lights switched back on and the music returned, but the server and Cole were gone. What the hell? I whipped my head around looking for Cole, but he was nowhere. Cole? I said, still searching. I looked behind chairs, the bar, everywhere, but no Cole. My heart raced and my stomach sank. Layla squealed. Where's Cole, you guys? He was just right here. Cole? I called again as my stomach fluttered. We ran through the room, searching again, but he was nowhere to be found. I grabbed the iPad, my hands trembling as I typed. Help, our friend is gone. 2 seconds, 10 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes. No response. Layla rushed to the bookshelf looking for a button to open the door. How do we get out of here? I don't know, I said, grabbing the iPad. Maybe we can find a button on here. But there was no button for the door. Just switches for music, lights, and food, but nothing else. Someone call the restaurant and ask the hostess, Kiera said. I pulled out my cell phone and called the restaurant. After what seemed like 100 rings, Helga, the hostess, answered. Our friend is missing, and we need to open the door to look for him. I tried to keep my voice steady, but Helga was no help. You'll have to wait until your server returns. But he isn't answering. Then you have to wait until he returns. She sounded like a robot, as though she'd been pre-programmed to give the same useless responses no matter what customers asked. But the server didn't answer my last questions. He's going by the list. Helga snapped and then hung up. Huh? What does that even mean? You guys, I said, I don't know what's going on, but... At that moment, the secret door opened, and our server reappeared with another tray, even though we hadn't ordered anything else. Sir, where is our friend? Kiera asked, her eyes frightened. But the server refused to answer. He wouldn't even look at her, at any of us. Instead, he placed the items on the table. Then he pulled out his list again, scanned it, walked back to the wall, and flipped the switch again. And once more the music stopped and the room went black. And when the lights and music came back on, the server and Kiera were gone. We hadn't heard a peep. What the hell? I shouted. My heart thumped as we searched the room again, panicking. Steven's eyes bulged and Layla froze, looking too terrified to speak. Kiera? We called, but silence. Moments later, the server returned with another tray of items we hadn't ordered. Once again, he set the items on the table, scanned the list, walked to the wall, and flipped a switch. Again, the music stopped and the room went dark. A small gasp was the only sound, and when the lights and music returned, the server and Layla were gone. Holy crap, Steven said. We've got to get out of here, I said. I'm calling the police. My fingers shook as I called 911, but the call dropped before it rang. I lost the signal, I shouted. You try. Stephen tried, but the call dropped for him too. Why won't it go through? He shouted. I don't know, I said, dialing the front desk again. Apparently that was the only number that worked. After a few rings, Helga answered, sounding unmoved as I explained the situation. 3 of our friends have vanished. We need help now. Let us out of this room. But the hostess remained calm. You'll have to wait until your server returns. But he won't talk to us, I shouted, my anxiety surging. I checked the wall for the button he was pressing, but it only controlled the lights. Then Stephen's face turned paper white. Dude, I think they're going in alphabetical order. First Cole, then Kiera, then Layla. We've got to get out of here. But when the server returned this time, there was no tray. He simply placed a bill in front of me. Where are our friends? I shouted. He shrugged. They'll be back, he said. His voice was flat, emotionless, and robotic. Please pay your bill, sir. The server just stood there, not a hint of anxiety or discomfort. But where are our friends? Sir, please pay your bill. My eyes popped when I saw the bill. It's over $200, even though half the guests vanished. What the... But Stephen stopped me. Dude, screw the money. Just pay the man. Let's get out of here. I didn't argue. I handed the server my credit card. He ran it and handed it back without another word. Then he opened the door and we ran out. Our friends were nowhere to be found, and no other customers were dining when we left. Stephen and I dialed the police right away. But the cops were no help. We can't do anything unless they've been missing 24 hours. Your friends are probably playing a prank. He obviously didn't know our friends. The next morning, a knock sounded at the door. I shuffled to the door and peeked out. Layla. I flung the door open. I threw my arms around her. What the hell happened to you? She wore the same clothes from the night before. Her face was ghost white and terror-stricken, and her voice sounded flat like she was in shock. Where is Kiera? Cole? She stared at the wall, hardly blinking. I held her close, happy she was safe, but worried about my other friends. Those people? She said, pointing toward the restaurant. I don't know who or what they are, but... Her voice trailed off and I hugged her. An hour later, Stephen came over and pressed for details. Layla, I know you've been through a lot. I can't imagine, but we really need to know what happened. And we need to know if Cole and Kiera are okay. After a moment she spoke. When the lights went out, someone pressed a cloth over my mouth, and everything went black. And next thing I knew, I woke up in a dark room. Couldn't see anything. Where did he take you? I asked. She shrugged. I have no idea where we were. What happened to Cole and Kiera? Stephen asked. Layla shrugged. At one point, another man came in. I don't know who, and he pushed Kiera through a doorway. It looked like a long hallway with this creepy blue light blazing inside. I don't know. I only got a quick glimpse before he shut the door. Layla's eyes welled with tears as she continued, and I handed her a Kleenex. A few minutes later, the guy opened the door again and pulled Kiera back into the dark room where I was. But the person who came back, it wasn't Kiera. Layla sobbed. Stephen patted her shoulder, and his voice softened. What do you mean it wasn't Kiera? Layla's whole body shook with sobs. She could barely speak, but after a moment, she calmed and continued. I don't know. It wasn't her. Her voice, her energy, it just wasn't her. I don't know who or what took her place, but she isn't Kiera anymore. That's all I know. I hugged Layla, imagining myself running across the street to bash the server's head in, but getting pissed would only lead to more problems. Instead, I had to stay calm and think clearly. How did you get away? Steven asked. It was so weird. The server just said, the bill has been paid, and let me go. I have no idea what that was supposed to mean. None of it made sense to us either. But after 24 hours, I called the police to report Cole and Kiera missing. Perhaps the strangest part about this experience is what happened several days later when police called with an update. Your friends didn't go missing, the officer said. They said they told you they were leaving early, and your friend Kiera is working at Miss Lucy's now. Wait, what? No way. That's impossible. That didn't sound like her, and it wasn't like either of them not to call or text for days. So after I hung up, I called Miss Lucy's. Sure enough, Kiera answered, but her voice sounded flat and robotic. I barely recognized it. Miss Lucy's, Kiera speaking. Kiera, it's Will. What happened to you? And why are you working there? But it was like she didn't know me. All she said was, I'm sorry, sir. Are you on the list? I hung up. I never did find out everything that happened to Cole, Layla, and Kiera that night, but I was grateful Layla had been spared. After that night, Cole and Kiera changed. I felt like I hardly knew them anymore, and they spent all their time with their creepy new friends from the restaurant. Since then, I've talked to other people who have been to Miss Lucy's, and they all have similar stories. And some people's friends vanished, but never returned. Unfortunately, the police didn't believe their stories. However, everyone says their friends are different now. Maybe what really happens at Miss Lucy's will always remain a mystery, but one thing we do know is we're never going back. My name is Sydney White. I'm writing this because my therapist thinks it will help. I'm honestly willing to try anything to get a little peace of mind at this point. For some background, this incident began in April of my junior year of high school when I was 16. I'm about average height with blue eyes and long brown hair. My mom and I live alone in an old 19th century Victorian style home that has been passed down in our family for generations. Someday I'm set to inherit the house, though I'm not so sure I want it anymore. The house is complete with 3 stories, a basement, and a sizable front and backyard. There's a chest-high iron fence surrounding the property. My room is on the 2nd floor. It has a white marble balcony with 2 elegant glass doors leading out of it. Ever since I was little, I had always adored the house. The ancient black and white photographs of my ancestors, outdated furniture, and relics gathered by family members throughout the years all instilled me with a longing sense of nostalgia. As a child, I would often just sit in the living room for hours daydreaming of what it would have been like to live decades or even centuries ago. I would let my imagination run wild with fantasies from times long since past, until eventually Mom would drag me out from my stupor and urge me to play with the other children in the area. That was my only qualm with my home. Due to its old and slightly dilapidated state, I found it very difficult to keep friends. The other kids constantly whispered amongst themselves, and rumors that the house was haunted spread like wildfire on a dry summer day. The creaking of floorboards and whistling of the AC unit through the empty corridors were sounds that I had grown accustomed to after residing there my entire life. To the other children, though, this was hard proof that there were ghosts roaming the halls, waiting to claim their next victims. The same routine would play out every time I brought a new friend over. After a little coaxing, they'd come inside, stay for all of 2 minutes, then make up some half-hearted excuse to hightail it back home. My humble abode repelled more children than Monster House. Due to this, I didn't have many friends growing up, and the trend continued well into my high school years. So you can imagine my excitement when Alex from my 3rd period English class announced that he was throwing a party while his parents were out of town, and that the whole class was invited. I was ecstatic. I'd never even hung out with boys, let alone gone to a party. The days leading up to the event were filled with anxious anticipation. I was obsessing over the thought that I might meet a cute boy and have my first taste of alcohol all in one glorious night. When the date finally arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. I'd spent hours curling my hair and perfecting my makeup, convinced that at some point my knight in shining armor would glide in and sweep me off my feet. I had made arrangements to ride to the party with Stephanie, a somewhat nerdy girl who didn't have many friends of her own. I knew she only offered to take me so she wouldn't have to show up to the party by herself, but I didn't mind. Honestly, I didn't want to arrive alone either. After what felt like hours, Stephanie's blue Honda Civic inched into our driveway. I sauntered toward the vehicle, radiating confidence. "Have fun, Sydney," Mom yelled after me as her gaze followed me down the drive from her spot in the doorway. "And try not to drink too much," she mused with a wink. A smirk had spread across her face, and I couldn't help but chuckle. I always thought my mom was gorgeous, a trait that she unfortunately did not pass down. I was reminded of the fact all too often, as it was a popular topic amongst school bullies. "It's not that kind of party, Mom," I lied as I rolled my eyes dramatically. "Whatever you say." She shrugged, flashing me a toothy grin. Mom's long blonde hair fluttered in the breeze as she waved goodbye. Her deep green eyes shimmered with pride, hoping in vain that I'd formed some semblance of a friendship. The party was a major letdown. I won't bore you with too many details, but only about 10 people showed up, including us. I didn't realize how gross beer would taste, but I somehow managed to choke down a couple Budweisers. After being hit on by nearly every guy at the party, I begged Stephanie to take me home. She was having more fun than I was, but after some pestering, she begrudgingly caved. The ride back to my house was marred by a tense, uncomfortable silence as Stephanie hurriedly peeled away. I stumbled up the driveway and fished in my pocket for my house key. I'd gotten a little more tipsy than I'd realized, and my already lackluster cognitive skills eluded me. I eventually located my keys. I jabbed at the keyhole, and after a couple sloppy attempts, the lock clicked open. I crept up the stairs as silently as I could in my inebriated state, putting forth my best effort not to wake Mom. Once I made it upstairs, I ran through my nightly bedtime routine and retreated to my room. I plopped into bed and tried to drift off to sleep, the immense disappointment of the night still fresh in my mind. After a few minutes of restlessly tossing and turning, I picked up on a noise at my balcony doors. I perceived what sounded like a faint tapping on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I drowsily glanced over at my alarm clock. Midnight. I ignored it and rolled onto my side facing the wall, probably just a tree branch. But then the tapping escalated to 3 knocks in rapid succession. Tap, tap, tap. I shot up in bed as a pang of fear coursed through me. I whipped my head to the balcony, fully expecting to lock eyes with some horrid creature, and nothing. It must have just been the alcohol messing with my head. A little shaken up, I laid back down and somehow fell into a fitful slumber. The following morning I awoke to the tantalizing aroma of eggs and bacon wafting upstairs from the kitchen. I stumbled out of bed and groggily traced the scent downstairs where Mom was cooking breakfast. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she giggled. "Good morning," I croaked, trying and failing to rub the sleep out of my eyes. "Did you have fun last night?" Mom asked as she placed a mouth-watering concoction of eggs, bacon, and toast before me. "Yeah, I guess," I wearily replied, shoveling food into my mouth. I wasn't feeling great from the night before, and a hot meal was just what the doctor ordered. "Meet any cute guys?" Mom prodded as a smile plastered itself across her face. "Oh yeah, some real Leonardo DiCaprios," I sarcastically remarked, mouth nearly overflowing with egg. "By the way, Mom, you didn't hear knocking on any of the windows last night, did you?" I inquired nonchalantly. "No, when did you hear that?" she asked quizzically, concern washing over her countenance. "Never mind. It was probably just a tree branch," I blubbered between chews, attempting to ease Mom's tension. "Okay, just please let me know if you hear it again," she requested sternly, seemingly relieved by my statement. The remainder of the day was mostly uneventful. After breakfast, I wasted the day watching Netflix. I finished off my evening by knocking out some homework. It was Saturday, but getting my work out of the way early provided me with a sense of productivity. After putting my books away and brushing my teeth, I hopped into bed. I'm usually off in dreamland no later than 10:30, and that night was no different. I laid down and shut my eyes, but I was having an uncharacteristically tough time falling asleep. I was overthinking, stressing myself out over an upcoming chemistry exam that I felt wildly unprepared for. I was finally starting to nod off when I heard it, that same rhythmic tapping on the balcony doors. Tap, tap, tap. I lazily turned to the clock. Midnight. Before I could divert my attention to the noise, it started again, but this time it was much louder. Tap, tap, tap. Again I bolted upright and fixed my gaze on the balcony. My heart pounded against my rib cage and I thought it would leap from my chest at any given moment. I could have sworn that for a split second I glimpsed a shadow ducking out of view into the darkness. I was more than a little creeped out at this point. I shined my phone flashlight at the doors and, discovering an absence of creepy shadow people, I laid back down and breathed deeply in an attempt to regulate my racing heart. I again wrote it off as a tree branch or my mind playing tricks on me, and eventually I managed to doze off. The tapping continued every night going forward. Right at midnight, I'd be ripped from a peaceful slumber to a commotion at my balcony that wouldn't cease until I'd inevitably turn to face it, and every time nothing was there. After a couple weeks, it was beginning to take a toll on me. I was sleep deprived, my grades began to slip, people noticed. Concerned teachers pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home. Classmates were telling me I looked like a ghost. Mom repeatedly questioned me on it, but I just told her I was stressed about exams. I desperately needed to put a stop to that incessant tapping. One night, I'd had enough. As usual at midnight, I was yanked out of my restful state. I'd made up my mind. This time, I was going to ignore it. It started off light, tap, tap, tap. Then it grew louder and increased in frequency. Tap, tap, tap. I was determined not to look. I kept my eyes firmly shut, even when the tapping turned to pounding. Boom, boom, boom. I was beginning to worry that whatever or whoever it was would crack the glass. Irritated, I relented and my eyes wandered to the double doors. What I saw chilled me to my very core. There was a man standing on my balcony. Dirty, tattered clothing hung off his emaciated frame like rags. He was deathly thin, reminiscent of a skeleton the way his skin stretched tightly over bone. Stringy, greasy black hair fell past his shoulders. The wide smile that blossomed across his face revealed black gums and yellow, rotting teeth. His manic expression never faltered. But worst of all were his eyes. Those black pinpoint pupils connected to mine, and I could sense something behind them even through the glass. Hunger. A deep, animalistic drive that I can only describe as predatory. Then he spoke. "Oh, Sydney, I can see you," he sang in a sickly, sweet tone. "Please let me in. I just want to play." He called, giddy with excitement. My heart dropped into my stomach. Something sinister lurked just beneath the surface of those words. He licked his lips, his disgusting gray tongue worming its way over the rim of his mouth. I tried to avert my gaze, but I was rooted in fear. Sweat pooled on my brow, and my hands shook uncontrollably. My breathing became rapid and shallow. A million thoughts raced through my brain in unison. Who was this man? How did he get onto my second-floor balcony? And how the hell did he know my name? I was broken from my trance by forceful hammering against the doors. The man's smile was gone, having devolved into an expression of pure hatred. "Let me in! Let me in! Let me in!" With each repetition, his fist smashed against the glass, rattling the doors in their frame. Then out of nowhere, he paused. His eyes eagerly lit up and his twisted smile returned, stretching so far that I thought the corners of his mouth might tear. "It's okay, Sydney. If you won't let me in, then I'll do it myself, because I've found where they hid the key." He could barely contain his elation as he produced an ancient rusted key from an indistinguishable pocket in his ragged clothes. My head spun and my vision blurred. This couldn't be happening. He slipped the key into the door and it unlocked with a nauseating click. At last, my body regained mobility and I went into full panic mode. I leapt out of bed and bolted down the hall to Mom's room, the man's deranged cackling reverberating off the walls behind me. His thunderous footsteps were closing the distance. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, waking Mom in the process. "Sid, it's the middle of the night. What's going on?" She groaned lazily. I locked the door and sputtered a nearly incoherent string of words. "Mom, man, inside, police." I choked out before I broke down, tears streaming down my face. The hallway had grown eerily silent as I sobbed hysterically. Mom stared at me for a second, bewildered, but she did call the cops. They took a statement from me and combed through the house. Of course, by then the man was long gone and there wasn't much they could do. The balcony doors were even shut and locked when they arrived, so there was no evidence that the man had been on the property at all. They urged us not to hesitate to call back if he returned, and reassured us that they'd send a cruiser down our streets intermittently for the next few nights. I slept in Mom's room for a week after that. I questioned her about a hidden spare key, but she swore up and down that our 2 house keys were the only ones in existence. We installed cameras and a home security system, but even then I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that room again. I moved all my things down the hall into an unoccupied room, away from the balcony. Suddenly every resonance terrified me. Noises that I had previously attributed to the age of the house, Didn't sound like normal creaks and whistles anymore. I started going to therapy. After a few weeks, the therapist, my classmates, and even Mom had begun to convince me that I had imagined the whole ordeal. I almost believed them. Almost. My therapist told me that I would never be able to fully heal until I stepped out onto that balcony. So about a month after the incident, I finally built up enough courage to walk out there. I rested my hands on the smooth white marble and peered out over the neighborhood. Spring was among us, and the flowers were in full bloom. I soaked it all in as the wind blew my hair, and dragonflies zipped past my face. I watched a robin feeding its babies in the tall oak tree in our front yard. Bushy-tailed squirrels bounced along, searching for acorns. It was picturesque. I felt completely at peace standing there just observing nature. All the stress I'd built up from that night immediately washed away. Until I glanced down, because as I lifted my hands off the stone railing, a strand of long black hair clung to my fingers. My wife, Antonia, disappeared on June 9th last year. She was supposed to be at home taking care of the kids while I was at work, but no, she wasn't home. I took care of the house and the kids without worrying about my job because I was given paid leave due to the sudden disappearance of my wife. Antonia was loved by everyone in the neighborhood. She opened a cheap daycare center right next to our house, allowing parents who couldn't afford to put their children in a normal nursing home to finally rest easy. She used to also host parties and barbecues in our house and invite everyone in the neighborhood to join in without worrying about any costs. She was so loved that even the mayor of our town showed up to her empty casket funeral. I knew Antonia for just over 12 years before she disappeared. We were high school lovers who had everything work out well for them. We argued every once in a while, but what couple doesn't? I asked her to marry me 4 years ago. We had 2 kids together, a boy and a girl. The oldest, Jeremy, is 7 years old, while his sister is 4 years old. A lot of people seemed to be sadder than I was that she was gone. I was adjusting well to her being gone. Yet today, when she walked into our front yard and stood in front of our front door while holding her hands behind her back, I couldn't believe it. I thought I was seeing a ghost. She was still wearing the same clothes she was wearing the last time anyone saw her alive, and she seemed normal. There was no blood, no cuts, no anything. Her limbs were all attached, and she seemed human. I knew this couldn't be real. I remember vividly that I cut her limbs off while she was screaming and begging for mercy. I remember putting what remained of her into a bag of rocks and dumping it into the ocean. I made sure nobody saw me, and I made sure to tell nobody. Yet there she was, standing on our front porch, looking straight into the doorbell camera and smiling. I have to admit that I was scared. Not for the kids, not for myself, but by what this thing was. I got even more scared when my son saw his mother through the window and opened the door for her. I locked and barricaded my office door before I got my gun from the safe in my desk's drawer. Forget about the kids, I thought to myself. I never really loved them anyway. I looked at the monitor that displayed my doorbell camera feed. She was no longer there. I heard the kids talking with her downstairs, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Not like it mattered, because then I heard screaming. I felt my entire body vibrate. My ears were blasted with shrieks of terror and pain that I never want to hear again. A second later and there was no noise in the house. Not even the air conditioning unit or the creaking floorboard of this old house made a noise. Nothing apart from my heart punching through my stomach and a thud that repeated every other second. I knew that sound. It was the sound of something slowly walking up the staircase. That thing wasn't my wife. I never had a true wife. I never had kids. All of the evidence lined up. Antonia was cheating on me with my best friend. I was sterile. I couldn't have kids. She hired 2 people to take care of the daycare while her and Matthew were playing together while I was out at work. That's why I saw his car on my driveway one day. That's why I called her asking what she was doing that same day, and she sounded exhausted. I never called her out for it. I just poisoned her drink one night while the kids were sleeping. I took her into an abandoned cabin on the outskirts of the small town we lived in, and did my deed there. Once I was done, I took all the evidence to a lake and dumped it into the ocean, making sure that it sunk in. Some people suspected I did it. I was the cause of her disappearance, but there was no evidence of any wrongdoings on my part. They had nothing that could pinpoint it to me. Not even her parents suspected a thing. They told me they were sorry for my loss at her empty casket funeral. I kept in touch with them for a while before they both died in their sleep within a week of each other. They were good people, the only good involved in this story. I relived all of our memories together in my head. Our first date, our first kiss, our wedding. Everything was going well. We didn't even want kids. I don't know why she did it. Why did she betray me in such a way? Especially with my best friend. I heard slamming on the door and felt the entire house shaking. I knew I didn't have time and had to act fast, but what could I do? I thought of calling the cops, but would they believe me if I tell them that my wife is back from the dead and trying to kill me? I could try and shoot it once, it makes it past the doorway, but if cutting her into several pieces and dumping her into the ocean was not enough to kill her, several bullets will definitely be of no help. I could fight it, and try to knock it out and run out the door, but the entire house shakes every time it slams on the door. Even I couldn't do that with all of my strength, and even if I am successful, wouldn't it just find me again? I could jump through the window of my small office and make a run to my car, but wouldn't it be suspicious if I was in my pajamas driving out of state while my house has 2 dead kids in it? I thought of my last option. I had no chance of escaping without ruining my entire reputation or getting killed. At some point the truth will come out. People will find out what really happened to Antonia. So why not finish the job myself? By the time you are reading this, I would have hopefully put an end to myself. Windows boarded, doors padlocked, lights snuffed out, chimney barricaded. With heart pounding, I pressed myself between my parents' legs, backs against the living room wall, straining to hear for any sound beyond the house, but so far, it appeared as nothing was stirring, not even a mouse. From across the room I can see there are gaps in the wood, giving an obscured look at the 2 closest houses across the street. Like ours, their house is pitch black, but I knew that the Johnsons and the Yangs are cowering in their homes just like we are. The whole street is. It feels like hours have passed, but soon I hear the faint sound of sleigh bells, and suddenly my shoulders are gripped tight by my mom and dad. He's come. All of a sudden it's harder to breathe. I suck the air up, but it doesn't feel like enough, and my breathing is so loud. Is it normally that loud? Is he going to hear me? My mom crouches in front of me, wipes away tears I didn't realize had fallen, and cradles me in her arms. She tells me I have to remain quiet, that I have to be good. I have heard this from her countless times. The bells grow louder but remain slow. each beat painfully drawn out as it passes overhead and circles back around. It's going to stop at our street tonight. I can't help it. A squeak of a cry escapes my mouth before my dad covers it tightly with his hand. I watch as my mother silently prays for our house to not be chosen, her lips moving frantically and eyes shut painfully tight. A thud sounds as a heavy object touches down on the roof, but it's not ours. Dad breathes out a hard sigh of relief, but he's still trembling. The three of us creep towards the window and peer out the few inches gap between the two boards. I can't see the sleigh or the reindeers, but I know it must be there. We can't see much at all at first. As my eyes adjust, I can finally make out some obscure shapes. A wide shadow figure on the roof of the Johnsons' house, its heavy steps shaking fresh snow off the tiles as it walks. Then, with all its force, it slams itself into the chimney, brick pieces exploding into the air as he bellows in a voice that sounds like a painfully slow, warped record. Hang your stockings and say your prayers, 'cause Santa Claus comes tonight. I have never witnessed an attack with my own eyes before, just the videos people have posted online. My parents don't know about those. They don't know that I have seen what is about to happen before. But even so, it hasn't prepared me for the real thing. A warmth runs down my legs as my terror escapes in physical form, but my wide eyes stay glued to the window. The three of us are paralyzed, forced to watch what is about to happen. He knows he can't get down the chimney, so he's smashing it to pieces in frustration. The Johnsons block their chimney too, but it will only be a delay for the inevitable. He will get inside. He gets on all fours and crawls over the edge of the roof and down the side of the house, peering into each of the windows as he chuckles his trademark ho ho ho, searching for the room that the family are hiding inside. He must have found what he was looking for, as once he gets to one of the bedroom windows, he begins to relentlessly pound his fists into the brick while staring into the window. All the while he jovially sings, "Let it snow." With each punch, the hole in the wall gets larger and larger until he can tear his way inside the house. We can just about hear the guttural screams of the family now that there is a large hole in their house. Wave after wave of screaming, it pierces the silent night. We see nothing for a long time, and eventually it falls quiet once more. Minutes pass until a faint glowing can be seen in the otherwise dark house, moving from one window to another, back to the hole. Out he comes with the two children, Jack and Harry, no more than 5 years old, wrapped up in Christmas lights and dangling by their feet. Their backs are bent back painfully and stockings stuffed into their mouths to keep their screams in. He has hold of them as he climbs back out and up to the roof again. He's covered in blood, but most noticeably, his mouth has the worst of it. His whole face is covered in red gore, which only showcases the whites of his wide, unblinking eyes as he looks out over the neighborhood. He knows everyone is watching, just like we know he is always watching. He throws them into his sleigh. Jack and Harry weren't good this year, and they are never seen again. Hi guys, not sure if this is the right place for it, but I thought that if anyone would be interested in my story, then it would probably be the people here. So I moved into a new place recently. It's a pretty good spot, nice and quiet, and right on the edge of the city. The rent's really decent as well, especially for a newly renovated apartment in this area of London. Apparently the building's been around for ages, and the location isn't super ideal for a lot of people, so they had to keep the rent low. No complaints from me though. I don't have a car, and I can cycle pretty easily to the nearby station. Moving in was straightforward enough, and I'm pretty satisfied with the place so far. Here's where it gets weird. Shortly after settling in, I noticed that a patch of loose carpet, right at the threshold between where the bedroom connects to the living room. Now normally I would have just called the landlord to fix it up, but it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Thought I'd take care of it myself. Save some cash in the process, right? Upon looking at the carpet more closely, I found something a bit unusual. There was a little gap where the carpet seemed to sag. When I pulled the carpet back, I found a little patch, no wider than my fist, where it looked like a floorboard had decayed, revealing the subfloor beneath. It was a bit like poking a hole in the top layer of foil on one of those pre-packaged meals. A little peephole revealing everything that was underneath. I'm a pretty curious guy by nature, so I couldn't help but shine a torch in there to have a quick peek. I wasn't expecting much, but to my surprise, right beneath the hole there sat an unassuming little object, a squarish shape which barely stood out amongst the dust, dirt, and mold. When I first saw it, I thought it was a tablet, an iPad, or a Kindle, or something. With a coat hanger, some mounting tape, and a lot of patience, I eventually managed to fish it out. Out in the light, I could see that it was, in fact, not an iPad, like I had hoped, but a little hardcover bound book. Though the exterior was essentially eaten away by a blackish mold, I could still make out a single word. Impressed against the faded red cover, journal. Inside, the pages were in pretty bad shape. The first half of the journal was irretrievable, mold-stained and practically crumbling to the touch. I could barely leaf through them without causing irreversible damage. The back half wasn't much better, with a good portion of it torn out, or, strangely enough, burnt. In addition, a lot of the writing itself was illegible, either crossed out, faded, or too frantically scrawled to comprehend. Around the margins and in the spaces between the words, I can make out strange sketches, shapes, and figures which are hard to describe. I'll see if I can upload some photos later. The contents are unusual, if not a little disturbing. It's a little disparity, because of how much of the text was unreadable, but I've transcribed the parts I could make out, and ordered them chronologically here. Let me know what you guys think. Journal entries. Monday, April 4th, 1953. Recently I've been feeling unwell. Upon returning from my latest trip to the east, I found that my whole body aches, and I am constantly stricken by bouts of weakness and fatigue. I cannot stand for long, as the world spins when I am upright. Most concerningly, I seem to be experiencing hallucinations. Strange visual distortions which addle both my balance and my perception of depth. Strangely enough, I no longer dream. Doctors have attributed it to an exotic ailment, exposure to miasmus, a viral disease, an insect bite. The source varies with each practitioner I meet. I do not know when this started. I do not recall the reason I went to Asia. Friday, April 29th, 1953. The symptoms have descended upon me quickly like a fog. In addition, my recollection has become hazy as well. I am unable to recall what it feels like to be without malaise. I have no recollection of my travels now. If it were not for this journal, I would not have known I traveled at all. The doctors attribute this state of being to a range of ailments. It differs with every visit. Bilious fever, ague, illness of the ears, eyes, and brain, even hormonal imbalances caused by states of panophobia and neurosis. Yet the tests have been fruitless. Physically, my body is not inconsistent with the body of a perfectly healthy human being. At this point, I care little about the cause. The symptoms are all I experience, and brief respite from these afflictions is my only desire. Wednesday, June 15th, 1953. As my condition worsens, more unique symptoms have begun to surface. In the past, I have written in my journal to distract myself from the turbulent environment around me, but now, when I put pen to paper, I have been unable to conjure neither the words nor images necessary to describe my past experience. I can only focus on my present state, of the world which appears before my sensations in the here and now. In the future, I might look back to these entries and recall this affliction which has ailed me for so long. But I am doubtful. Thoughts of the future are becoming hazy also. Sunday, June 19th, 1953. These visions, they have only grown in vividness and intensity. No longer are they simple distortions of shape and color in ordinary objects. Now, entirely new objects have emerged. Like balloon animals being inflated, thin figures billow outwards, creating uneven, grotesque forms. Almost always they are bulbous, organic things, bulging and pulsating before my eyes. Day uncertain. July 2nd, 1953. As I grow more accustomed to these visions, their features become more distinguished. What once were just vague, opaque blobs have now become sharply defined substances, or perhaps even organisms of sorts, perhaps even flora. Although they vary greatly in shape, color, and size, it is clear that there exists a certain resemblance between some more than others. It is possible they even belong to specific and distinct genera. But enough of this. To categorize hallucinations like they were some undiscovered zoological species is an act that even my addled mind can recognize as insanity. July 1953. They have begun moving now. Soundlessly they creep across my sight line, some locomoting like caterpillars, while others sink on wire-frame feet. These feet, thin feelers reminiscent of ant antennae, poke and probe the ground ahead, as if searching for stable ground. Dozens of these feelers extend from below their bodies. Globular, ovoid masses, which appear as smooth as they are pliant. Others sit upon stems like detached eyes floating in place. On more than one occasion, I have seen small ones collide, merge, and become one entity. Some of the larger ones, in fact, appear as a collection of small globules, orbs upon its body so numerous that it simulates fur. I can only wonder if they are a singular organism, or simply a congregation of them moving as one. In these pages, I see that I have once referred to them as flora. I now see that this was an error. Yet, neither. Are they fauna? They are a sort of combination, not quite animal, not quite plant. July, I think. 1953. They are everywhere. I have seen them creep across my page. I have seen them loom outside my window. They are not visions. I have reached out and touched them. The one I felt was chewing gum colored. It was warm and fleshy to the touch. 1953, I think. Perhaps they have always been here. Silent, numerous, invisible to the human eye. Perhaps my affliction is not illness, but insight. I have gained access to a world truer than our own. But this is no blessing. To watch and feel these things creep over my body, pulse on my bed, cast shadows over my building, it is something no man should see. Date uncertain. I awoke with one in my mouth. It crawled out so easily, as mundane as a laborer leaving their family home for work. It felt like a slick and pungent trail behind it. Tastes like gasoline. How long had it resided within me? How many of these creatures had I unknowingly ingested in my lifetime? My throat burns as I retch. Amongst the remains of my last meal, things shift and slither. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Date uncertain. To my family, if I had one, please burn this diary if you were to ever find it. I would do it myself, but I fear to exit my drawing room. In fact, I am no longer able to stand at all. Fixed to my writing chair, I can only scrawl upon this page. I gaze out my window and watch the world become unrecognizable before my eyes. I see them. Even when I close my eyes, I see them. They live beneath my eyelids, beneath my skin. I fear that they see me. I live on the 6th floor of an apartment building. My bedroom window overlooks a large park directly across the street. That park is where I work, and it makes for a very easy commute. I only work part-time, and I do basic groundwork every single day, from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. The park opens at 8 a.m. every day of the year, so I also unlock the gates. I never used to be a morning person. 8 a.m. is quite easy for me to be waking up, so I usually nap for an extra hour when I get back into my apartment. I'm also hired to close up. 1 hour before it closes, I have to lock up the toilets and empty all the public bins into the dumpster. 20 minutes before it closes, I have to start informing people that they should head out, as the park is closing. Once everyone is out, I go around and lock up all the gates. There are 5 in total. I stay until 30 minutes after the park has closed. Overall, I work for 2.5 hours a day. The opening shift is always 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., but the closing shift changes depending on the month. We're in December, so since it gets dark early, the park closes at 6 p.m., meaning I'm from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. It's a pretty easy job, and for the past couple of months, I've been looking for a second job nearby. Of course, this would mean I'd have to give up my 9 a.m. hour-long power nap, but I figured I could manage. It's about time I stopped that habit anyway. I recently got into contact with a company that hands out freelance work. Walk people's dogs in the neighborhood, deliver groceries, paint fences, etc. It's exactly the kind of extra work I was looking for, as it's flexible. I can change how much freelance work I do for the winter and summer months. The company is really great when you first sign up. You can give them the exact hours you're available. Last week I opened the park up as normal and did some freelance work after. It was 3 jobs and they were all dog walking. This meant I spent pretty much the whole day in the park for once, as that's where I tend to walk the dogs. 5 p.m. came around and I went to do all the closing shift stuff. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, and the last person was out of the park just 5 minutes after closing time. Anyone who has tried to get people out of a place that's closing will tell you that it's not too bad at all. I finished up and was going to go home, but remembered that I still had one more freelance task for the day. I had to deliver a carton of 6 eggs from a local store to a place a few blocks over. Easy job. I went to the store and picked up some eggs. The job was specific on which brand it had to be. I should have probably checked the eggs, as when I tried to pay for them, the cashier apologized for the eggs being cracked and swapped them out. But I got them in the end and started making my way to the delivery address. I was walking on foot since it wasn't too far and was extremely tired. Since starting the freelance work, there have been some days that I've been able to squeeze in my hour-long power nap. This was not one of those days. It seems silly that I can't operate properly without it, but it's just something I have to get used to. What happened next? I blamed on my fatigued mind. I now know that I shouldn't have. The store and delivery address were basically perfectly 2 blocks from the park in either direction. The park was exactly in the middle. As I walked past it, I noticed something moving from deep within through the trees. I shouted through, "Hey, the park should be empty now," but got no response. I figured it was nothing, since my view was obstructed anyway, but as I walked past one of the main gates, no longer any trees blocking my view, I could still make something out. There were no lights on in the park. Thick, dense darkness shrouded it at night. It almost feels like you should be able to reach out and touch it, like trying to walk through it would be physically impossible. Yet through it, I could make out a vaguely humanoid figure. There was no distinct color. In fact, almost a lack thereof. Just a gray, blurry blob, dancing and moving, changing and swaying. It looked familiar, perhaps like the kind of things you see when you look directly at a bright light and then away. More like an imprint on the eye than anything physical. "I work here. You need to leave. It's trespassing." The way that it didn't respond or even seem to move at my request, I decided I was just being silly. I think we've all seen things in the dark before, especially when we're tired. So, as uneasy as I was feeling in that moment, I continued to walk past the park. The full journey along that side is about 3 minutes, and I spend most of it looking inwards through the fence. It seemed to move with me. I didn't pay a lot of attention to where I was walking and nearly tripped over a few times, especially when I nearly walked directly into a black cat. I made my way to the delivery address, delivered the eggs, and headed back home. I live right in the middle of that side of the park, so another 2 minutes of being able to peer in. I didn't spot the figure at first. I walked past someone who lives on my streets, and we stopped to chat. As we do occasionally. He was coming back from the store I had been to with some cleaning supplies. I asked why he desperately needed those, and he just said that he needed to clean a mess in his kitchen. I laughed. It must be a hard job if you need that much. I felt calmer again now. I had human contact. There was something so eerie about darkness. Being in the dark, thinking I saw something, it just made me feel so alone. Having a conversation is what I needed. We said goodbye, and I continued walking for the last minute of my journey. But right as I got to my apartment building, I turned around before I opened the door, and almost collapsed from fear. Right up against the fence, clear as day, was a tall, gray thing. It looked less humanoid this close up, less like it was dancing and swaying, and more like it was shaking and convulsing. Its gray skin was pulsing and shifting in a way that almost made me not notice the complete lack of eyes. I only realized it had no eyes when eyes began to form right on its face. Its skin seemed to open up on the head, allowing for 2 grotesque eyes to pierce through. I caught myself falling slightly and got through the building door. I didn't wait for the elevator. I ran up the stairs and didn't look back. I got to the 6th floor, got into my place, and peered out my bedroom window. There was nothing at the fence, and it almost spooked me just as much to see a lack of anything there, like I was crazy. For the past week, I've phoned in sick to my park job. My boss keeps asking if I even had the energy to just lock and unlock the gates. I keep claiming I don't. I continue to do my freelance work during the bright hours, just hoping my boss and colleagues don't spot me. I just don't want to be in the park in the dark again. I've not even so much as peered out my bedroom window at night. But this morning, I tried. Today at about 4 a.m., I got up to go to the toilet. As I was about to get back into bed, I just felt like I should peer out again. I did, and I saw it, right up against the fence, shaking, convulsing, and pulsing, like it was almost trying to pass through the bars. Maybe it's just because I'm 6 floors up and couldn't see it properly, but sometimes it even looked like parts of it were passing right through the solid metal of the fence. I spotted a woman walking down the street on her phone. I saw she was carrying a carton of eggs, and then it clicked. I've seen her around before. I was pretty sure she worked for the same freelance company as me, but she was about to walk past the figure. Could she not hear it? I realized at that moment that I must be crazy. Nobody else can even see this thing. Then it grabbed her. Right as she walked past, it grabbed her. After that, they both vanished into the darkness. I don't mean to say the figure ran off. They quite literally vanished. They morphed until they were nothing, as if this thing was able to just conjure up ways to move that were beyond comprehension. I was half sure that I was asleep at that point. Right then, I noticed, pulled up on the side of the road nearby, a black car. A man and a woman stood next to it, looking directly at the figure, talking about something to each other. It brought an odd sense of slight relief to know I wasn't the only person seeing this. I knew them from somewhere, but couldn't quite put my finger on where. But then it dawned on me. They were the first people I met from the freelance company. They just watched in silence as one of their employees was abducted in front of them, by a paranormal figure no less. They must be involved somehow. I don't know how or why, but they must be. Everything going on in my life suddenly slotted together. I just haven't figured out how yet. My park job, my freelance job, this figure. How do they all connect? Today the woman was on the local news, reported as missing. I can't do anything. Who is going to believe me? If I tell anyone, I suddenly become the prime suspect. I do have another freelance job today, though. I now know the job is dangerous and that my bosses do not have my best interests in mind at all, but they can't know that I know. My only job today is to paint a fence white. Usually I only have to do some of the fence. Someone comes along after to do the rest. I'm going to write something to warn them, and then I'm going to quit. I've scheduled this to post in a few weeks so that I can be long gone before the company knows I've said this all. If I quit, they can't hurt me, but they can still hurt others. I hope whoever sees my warning takes it seriously, and that I make a difference in some way. Lately, sleep paralysis has become some sort of meme or normality on the internet. It's been reduced to seeing an imaginary monster while laying in bed not being able to move or do anything. But I can assure you, it's much more than just that. Ever since I was 4 years old, I've been having to go through that intense pain of not wanting to sleep, staying whole nights awake as a little kid, often crying for hours at a time about the shadows coming to get me, that feeling of pressure every time you even think about nighttime. Like a car standing on top of your heart ready to squish it in the most painful way possible, is something that can't even be described in text. It all started as the exact opposite for me. Long nights of insomnia that I wish I could get back. Times of me wanting to sleep. At the age when I'd only just learned to walk. I remember being unable to communicate with my parents in any way other than crying, loud babbling that only made my heart hurt more. The only times that I was able to sleep, my parents recall having to stop me from falling out of bed and walking around the house. At first, they thought I just had a bad case of both insomnia and sleepwalking, but as the years moved on, it turned out to be a lot more than that. On my 3rd or 4th birthday, I started sleeping a lot more often like a normal kid would. It was a good sign at first, and the doctors even said the sleepwalking might be over soon. Unlucky me, however, it wasn't. My parents started having to stay awake at night, mostly because little sleeping me had found his way to the sliding glass backyard door. The first time they found out about this, they woke up with me crying outside, having smashed a chair against the now broken door. Fortunately, I was unharmed. At least that time. As I grew up, I became more scared of the night. I mostly tried to sleep during the day, but it still wasn't enough. I remember asking my parents to tie a rope around my hand and to my bed. Once they tried, however, they had to drive me to the hospital that same night. I had eaten part of the rope to get out, and I'd swallowed part of it. I'm guessing you know now that this wasn't a normal thing to happen to anyone. Don't worry, it gets worse. When I was 10 years old, we developed some sort of system. At night, everyone had to close all the doors and windows in the house. Any object or piece of furniture except my bed had to be more than 1 meter away from where I slept. This was to ensure I didn't scratch or eat anything. I had to keep both arms tied with some expert climber's rope to the bed. If possible, the sheets should be too tight for me to move easily, mostly to delay myself trying to get out of bed. It was a full moon night. I needed to have some sort of protection to stop myself from biting myself. Along with some other stuff, this was the safest way to keep myself from rising up, smashing one of the windows and running into the wild. We live next to a small forest in California, and that was my favorite place to hide when I slept. We even got the police searching for me quite a few times. By then, they were almost used to my parents calling them at night. This was around the time when I just tried to stop sleeping. I'd just stare at the walls full of moving shadows until the sun rose and my parents came to let me out. At some point, I started thinking of me when I sleepwalked as a whole different person. I was a kid, and that was the best thing I came up with to understand such madness. I called that version of me IlIlLIIIlllI, the Greek god or interpretation of nightmares. 10 years later, I developed some sort of sleep paralysis. I'd wake up wherever IlIlLIIIlllI left me, unable to move. I'd just have to stay there, often in an uncomfortable position, with the sinking feeling that I was being watched. The worst thing is, that thing that watched me, IlIlLIIIlllI, I see it now. Him. I don't know how, but I just know he's there. I've talked about this to professionals who told me it's just a hallucination. The thing is, lately, his presence has been getting stronger. I feel him now. I see his shadow, and even have an idea of how he looks like. Behind me, even as I'm writing this, I can now feel his warm breaths on my neck. At nights, his presence is getting bigger, harder to control. Every time I wake up, he's watching me. Those red eyes are almost impossible to describe in words. They're just beautifully terrifying, able to turn your heart upside down with one glance, literally. Every time I go to sleep, I'm closer and closer to escaping, more and more. I see myself moving without wanting to, and I think soon he'll take over me when I'm awake. He's watching me right now. He's going to make me pay for this, and it's almost turning nighttime. Please be careful out there. And if you see a young man in the middle of the forest, Don't approach me. IlIlllIlllI might try to take you too. For my daughter's 10th birthday, I got her a big vat of modeling clay. At first, it was a big success. I mean, why wouldn't it be? What kind of child doesn't love messing around with Play-Doh, right? Modeling clay was just the natural progression from that. A step up. It was an innocent idea, but as you will soon come to understand, I wish more than anything that I would have just bought her a dollhouse instead. Lily was one of the most artistic and creative people I'd ever met, despite her young age. I would always find her sitting in her room painting or drawing on a piece of paper, or maybe acting out a scene from one of her favorite TV shows, assisted by various stuffed animals. One time I walked in to find her working on a crude illustration of a pink unicorn. The day after that, I laid my eyes upon a beautiful castle, accompanied by a charming stick-woman princess. Sometimes her drawings would even transcend beyond the paper and find themselves on various furniture and walls around the house. As a supportive parent, I felt it was important to encourage this kind of behavior and help further develop her artistic expressions as best I could. Whenever I look back to my childhood years, I find many fond memories of sculpting various figures and characters out of modeling clay. Whether it be for an arts and crafts project, or just for recreational use, I found the creative possibilities to be endless. It was like playing God in a sense. I used to be pretty good as well. Through sculpting, I was able to transform concepts and characters that only existed in my mind into tangible, real-life objects that I could see and touch. The happiness it brought me back then was indescribable. I wanted my daughter to experience a similar joy to the one I had, to let her express herself through yet another artistic medium. I thought it would be the perfect gift for her upcoming birthday, and hopefully, it would serve as a distraction from what was currently going on with her mom. With the idea popped into my head, I immediately went over to my elderly neighbor Greg to ask if I could buy some modeling clay from him. He and his wife had been living across the street ever since we bought our house over a decade ago, and we had quickly gotten acquainted. Before he retired, he used to teach pottery lessons at the local community center in town. He was an extremely skilled potter, and had a gentle and kind aura surrounding him. He was a very beloved figure in our neighborhood, and would always go out of his way to help out members of the community. In a way, he was kind of like our own version of Bob Ross. I figured that since he had been retired for quite some time now, he might have some leftover clay that he would be willing to sell me for a fairly reasonable price. But when I went over to his house, a wave of sorrow washed over me as his wife, now a widow, answered the door with weary eyes. Upon hearing the tragic news, I offered my condolences and she invited me inside. I explained to her why I came over, and she happily led me to Greg's workshop in the attic. The place was exactly like you'd imagine it. Terracotta pots and various other ceramic artifacts lay scattered everywhere. On his desk were several of those spinning pottery wheels where you spin the clay around on. His shelves were littered with all kinds of materials one would use for such a craft. And the icing on the cake? The smell. It smelt like fresh, wet dirt with hints of iron in it. You know the one. Greg's wife, Isabel, was happy to part with some of the stuff that for so long had cluttered her attic. So she let me leave with a big vat of modeling clay that sat patiently waiting by his workbench. She said it was the clay Greg had been working with before his sudden passing, and that it was some kind of rare, high-quality mixture from South America. In other words, state-of-the-art and extremely expensive. Immensely grateful, I thanked her for her kindness and offered to lend a helping hand if she ever needed one. A few days later, a quizzical grimace formed on my daughter's face as she unboxed her new birthday present. "What is it?" she asked, inspecting the packaging. I didn't blame her for not understanding right away. The gray plastic barrel didn't exactly present itself as some kind of toy a 10-year-old would receive as a gift. "It's modeling clay, honey," I told her. My wife shot me a look from across the room. I hadn't informed her of the gift beforehand. "For your art projects. You can make anything you want." Lily looked over to her mom, who sat on the couch with a glass of wine, before rising to her feet and attempting to pry the plastic lid open. I walked over to my wife, Evelyn. I could tell that she wasn't too happy about her daughter's latest gift. "You'll be the one having to clean it up," she teased. "You know how much of a mess this is going to make?" "Don't worry, I will." I reassured her and reached out for her hand. A loud pop sounded throughout the living room as the lid flew open, and Lily grabbed a handful of clay and started toying with it. If only I had known then what she had just unleashed. Over the course of the next few weeks, Lily got really into sculpting. What first started as mostly abstract shapes and vaguely humanoid blobs eventually turned into well-defined and surprisingly detailed sculptures. And the special qualities of the clay made it really easy for her to use and disassemble as she wished. It hardened after only a couple of hours, and if she wanted to reshape it, all it took was a few drops of water to restore its malleable properties. I watched as she made various clay figurines, including a sculpture of one of the unicorns from her paintings, a couple of clay houses, and an elephant, among other things. But those aren't the focus of this story. No, if that were the case, there probably wouldn't even be a story to tell. The whole thing started when she made that thing. The wretched abomination she called Claymate. I never understood why she grew so fond of it. It was hideous. She was way too talented of an artist to waste her skills and time on something so awful looking. The first time I met Claymate was on a Sunday morning at the dining table. My wife and I sat down to eat breakfast when Lily walked into the kitchen carrying something over her shoulder. She pulled out 2 chairs from under the table and got seated. One for herself, the other for Claymate. Evelyn and I looked at each other. Upon the sight of Claymate, we initially wanted to laugh, as it looked hysterically despicable, but we managed to compose ourselves for our daughter's sake. It was the first time I had seen my wife smile in what felt like forever. "Who is this, honey?" Evelyn asked. "Claymate," Lily responded, reaching over to pour herself a glass of milk as if there was nothing abnormal about the situation. My wife gazed over to me and shot me a look that said, "Why couldn't you have just gotten her a Barbie doll?" Claymate was a person-shaped blob of clay with vaguely human facial features. 2 pinched-in holes for eyes, and a slimly carved smile. It had no hair, no clothes, or any other identifiable details. Just a crude humanoid clay person with an awful grin. It was about half the height of my daughter. "And what is he? Where is he from?" I asked, trying to show interest in her hobby. "Oh, he's not from around here. He's just visiting. He says he wants to make new friends." I looked over to Claymate, intently inspecting the lifeless expression that contoured across his face. There was just something about his stone-cold eyes that almost gave me the creeps. I know it's silly to be unnerved by a 10-year-old's arts and crafts project, but there was something eerie about it that I couldn't quite place my finger on. Honestly, it made me even regret buying the modeling clay in the first place. "That's great, Lily," Evelyn said. "I hope you give him the warm welcome he deserves." Later that day, we had to leave Lily home alone for the evening as I drove my wife to the hospital. She had recently been diagnosed with an extremely rare illness called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. I'm no doctor, so I can't really go into all the medical details surrounding the disease, nor do I see any point in doing so. All you need to know is that it's a fatal condition that causes brain damage which rapidly worsens over time. There is no cure, nor any effective treatment other than painkillers, antidepressants, and sedatives, which only serve to make the patient's remaining days as comfortable as possible. It was absolutely heartbreaking. As you can imagine, Evelyn didn't take the news too well, and neither did I. I was about to lose the love of my life at the young age of 38. It felt like we had gotten robbed. Our future was stolen by forces beyond our control. We hadn't told Lily yet, but I suspected she already knew something was wrong. Later that evening, we returned home from the hospital to be met with Lily sitting on the living room couch watching. Later that evening, we returned home from the hospital to be met with Lily sitting on the living room couch watching cartoons on the TV. Beside her sat Claymates, motionless. At first, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary, until I stepped on something soft and squishy. I looked down to see what it was. Wet clay. Then I looked up and noticed a pair of muddy footprints trailing from Claymate on the couch and out into the kitchen. "What's all this, Lily?" I asked her and pointed at the mess she had made. "It's just Claymate. His feet do that when he walks around," she responded. "I know it's a little messy, but I promise to clean it up later." I tried to suppress the growing frustration within me. The last thing I wanted to do after a long day at the hospital with my terminally ill wife was to come home to a muddy mess of a home. "Well, next time just carry him," Evelyn said, also with a hint of frustration in her voice. For some reason, I couldn't sleep that night. I laid awake in bed, tossing and turning. Was it too hot in here, or was the stress finally getting to me? I looked over at my nightstand. Bright red fluorescent lights displayed 2:03 a.m. Jesus, had it been 3 hours already? I was due to wake up in only 5. My wife was snoring per usual. Maybe I just needed a glass of water. I got out of bed and quietly made my way downstairs towards the kitchen. I didn't bother turning on the ceiling lights as I didn't want to ruin my tiredness even further. The streetlights outside shone in through the windows anyway, providing just enough light to partially illuminate the house's interior. I poured myself a glass of water, and then a glass of milk because I had heard somewhere that milk makes you sleepy. I didn't know if it was true or not, but I didn't care at that point. A heavy shuffling sound behind me caught me off guard and I stopped dead in my tracks. I quietly put the glass on the kitchen counter and turned around. It was coming from the living room. Then I heard it again, closer this time. It sounded like someone was scuffling around. I slowly made my way toward the source of the sound, struggling to keep my breathing as still as possible. And then a loud thud sounded as if something had fallen to the floor. I turned the corner and saw nothing. Nobody was there. Was my mind playing tricks on me? I walked to the center of the room to further investigate when I noticed something rectangular on the ground. I picked it up and held it in front of the large living room window to let the lamps outside shed light on whatever it was that I was holding. A family photo. taken years prior at some kind of amusement park. I can't even remember where we were that day, but we looked so happy, without a care in the world. Evelyn looked so young, so beautiful. I reminisced for a while before placing it back on the shelf it had fallen off. I stepped back and froze. My primal instincts had taken over. My conscious mind hadn't even registered it yet. I felt a crippling amount of dread overcome my entire body, the kind of dread you feel deep in your chest. I felt like a deer in headlights, frozen, not knowing what to do. Then I noticed it. The shadow in the corner of the room standing right by the staircase. A humanoid silhouette standing just 4 feet tall. Oh, I rationalized. It was just Lily. A wave of relief washed over me and I chuckled to myself. You gave me quite the scare there. I laughed, trying to shake off the fact that I let a 10-year-old girl make me quiver in fear. What are you doing up this late? It's way past your... Before I could finish the sentence, Lily's shadowy figure hurried up the stairs at what seemed to be an inhuman speed. Hey, relax. You're not going to get into trouble. I whispered as loud as I could before I ran after her. But just before I got to the bottom of the staircase, I slipped on something. I landed flat on my back, groaning. After a speedy recovery, I got back up and immediately realized what I had slipped on. Wet clay. But it was impossible. We had cleaned it all up before we went to sleep. I was sure of it. It certainly hadn't been there when we went to bed, and it most certainly hadn't been there before I went down for a glass of water either. This had to be fresh, I reasoned. I followed a trail of small traces of mud up the stairs, and then I followed the trail throughout the hallway, around the corner, past the bathroom, and finally into Lily's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, so I quietly pushed it open. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary, except for the muddy floor. Lily was sound asleep in her bed, or at least pretending to be. I walked over to check on her. Every parent knows that kids pretending to sleep behave very differently from kids that actually are asleep. You can tell by small erratic spasms in breathing, body language, and snoring. But by all accounts, Lily wasn't pretending. She really was asleep. I leaned in and put my ear to her to check again. Sound asleep. No signs of faking it. I contemplated waking her up and asking her about what I had just witnessed, but I decided against it. It could wait until morning. As I turned around to leave, I saw it. Claymate, sitting on a stool in the corner, observing me. Its blank, expressionless eyes, devoid of life, stared back at me as I exited the room. That thing gave me the creeps. The next morning, I asked Lily about what had happened, but you guessed it. She feigned ignorance. She was probably scared she would get into trouble. Had she found out about her mom? Would that explain the family photo? Maybe this was her way of dealing with it. I wish she'd just told me. Over the following weeks, Evelyn's condition worsened. Visits to and from the hospital became too regular. We would have to tell Lily sooner or later. So that's exactly what we did. We told her everything. Understandably, she didn't take it very well. She ran to her room, crying and throwing a fit. Of course I didn't blame her. I walked up to her bedroom door and put my hand on the doorknob, contemplating opening it. I stood there for a moment, listening to her crying. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, her crying started to sound different. She wasn't crying anymore. She was talking. I calmly opened the door to find her sitting on the floor, talking to a large mass of clay that had seemingly melted into the floor. What remained of Claymates' head had partially melted into the puddle. It seemed that in her rage, Lily had completely dismantled the poor thing. Good riddance, I thought. The morning after, I was horrified to see Claymate 2.0 sitting at the dining table ready for breakfast. This iteration of the abomination looked way more detailed. It was much bigger and had way more defined facial features. It nearly crossed over into the uncanny valley. It looked like a regular boy, made out of clay of course, much less of an eyesore, but it still infuriated me for some reason. "Does he have to sit at the table with us, sweetie?" I asked Lily, grinning my teeth. "You're getting mud all over the tablecloth." My wife looked at me, but refrained from saying anything. "He's part of the family, Dad. He has every right to sit here," Lily responded. For some reason, I had decided that I hated Claymate. There was just something about him that absolutely infuriated me now, and I didn't know why. I know it's silly, and maybe a bit hypocritical considering I bought her the thing, but still, I grew to hate him. "Just remove him, please," I blurted out. "He just wants to be loved too," she shouted. "That's all he wants. Why can't he be a part of the family as well? I want him gone from the dining room." I raised my voice. Lily grabbed Claymate and hurried off toward her room. I tried following her, but Evelyn stopped me, a tear running down her cheek. That day weighed heavy on both Lily and me, but I cannot even begin to fathom how my wife had felt when she received the news. Due to her severely deteriorated condition, she would have to make an overnight stay at the hospital. I brought Lily with me this time. Her first time, actually. She didn't want to leave her mother's side, even when the clock ticked past midnight. To be honest, I didn't want to leave either, but my wife insisted I get Lily home and ready for school the following day. Heavy drops of rain splattered across the hood of the taxi as we exited the vehicle. The overhead street lamps lit up my path as I carried Lily over my shoulder across our driveway. I felt commotion on my shoulders and looked over to Lily. As she was being carried, she attempted to wave her hand. "Why are you waving?" I asked her. "To say hello," she bluntly answered. "Say hello to who?" Her wave transformed into a pointing gesture. I looked up to the second-story window, the window to Lily's bedroom. I strained my eyes through the thick downpour. It was hard to make out anything. Ready to just forget about it, I was about to look away when the headlights of the taxi behind me turned to briefly illuminate her room. There was someone standing by the window. A black silhouette held up its hand as if to wave back. It stood there motionless, lit up by the powerful beams of the car. The taxi then swerved around and sped off, allowing her room to be swallowed by the oppressive darkness once more. I came to a halt right in front of our front door. Someone was inside my house. I had seen it for only a brief moment, but I was sure of it. I didn't want to go inside, but I couldn't stay out in the rain either. Not with Lily. I quietly unlocked the door and stepped inside. I put Lily down and reached for the light switch. With the presence of light, a horrifying sight presented itself. There were muddy footprints everywhere, and I mean everywhere. They ran across the floor, into the kitchen, into the living room, up the walls, and even along the ceiling. And they weren't boot prints either. No. The culprit appeared to be barefoot. 5 distinct toes accompanied each footprint. But what was most off-putting was the size of the prints. They looked like they belonged to a child. Close to Lily's size, actually. A chill ran down my spine upon realizing who they belonged to. No, it couldn't be, I thought to myself as I rushed up the stairs and burst open the door to Lily's bedroom. There, standing by the window, was Claymates. The eerily boy-like clay sculpture stood as still as a statue. Both of its arms hung down by its side. Soulless eye holes blankly stared back at me. It was like I was gazing into the abyss. It was clear who the footprints belonged to. The trail led here. Claymates remained motionless as I picked it up and angrily walked down the stairs with it. "What are you doing?" Lily cried. I paid her no attention as I opened the back door of the house and threw it as far as I could out into our garden. Lily tried running past me to save Claymate, but I held her back. "No, you're done. You can't play with him anymore," I firmly told her. I watched as the rain hammered down on Claymates, burning through him as if it were acid. He started melting. His face contorted into a horrible grimace as the rain dissolved Claymate's horrible visage. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. I brought Lily back inside and put her to bed. It was way past her bedtime, and way past mine as well. She was furious, and we fought hard before she finally fell asleep. I decided I would clean up the mess the following morning. Before laying down in my bed, I glanced out the window overlooking our garden. Claymate, or what remained of him, was completely gone. Good, I thought, as I laid down and closed my eyes. The following days were actually pretty normal. Evelyn was still admitted to the hospital, but she seemed to be in a sound enough condition. I visited her every day, and even brought her flowers on one occasion. Lily was doing well in school, despite her terrible sorrow for her mother. I started working longer shifts so that I could be better able to provide for my family during these straining times. It was just a matter of time before I would get the call from the hospital. It was inevitable. I started preparing for the worst. Luckily, Lily didn't seem to mind spending most of her days home alone. She had grown to be quite independent. Although she seemed quieter than usual, it was clear that her stress of losing her mother had a greater impact on her psyche than I initially thought. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I had just gotten home from work when laughter and giggling filled my ears as I stepped through the doorway. A familiar voice echoed through the house. I was in disbelief. I followed the sound to its source and fell down to my knees. There, sitting on the couch, together with Lily, was Evelyn. My terminally ill wife, Evelyn. Only she looked better than she had done in years. Like her illness had been cured overnight. She looked energized, warm, and welcoming. As beautiful as the day I had first met her. I tried to speak, but was unable to let out even a single word. How? What? I finally mustered up. Evelyn looked at me and smiled. I hadn't seen that smile in what felt like ages. Her perfect white teeth and pink, voluptuous lips radiated warmth. "Isn't it wonderful, Daddy?" Lily excitedly yelled. "Mommy's back. She's well again." "But they said," was all I could let out before my phone started ringing. Evelyn stood up from the couch and walked over to me. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. "It's the hospital, honey. Might want to take it," I said to her as she reached out her arms and put them around me. Evelyn was so soft. I raised the phone to my ear and answered. "Good afternoon, sir. This is Dr. Elliot speaking, calling from Eastmark General Hospital." The man on the telephone introduced himself. Evelyn's hands caressed the back of my neck. "It's about your wife, sir. You might want to sit down for this," Dr. Elliot continued. "Oh, I know, Doc," I replied in excitement. "I'm standing right here with her. She looks so..." "Excuse me? No, I'm not sure you understand, sir. I'm sorry," the doctor interrupted. The smile slowly faded from my face and formed into an expression of confusion. Evelyn pressed herself up against my back and held me tight. "What do you mean?" I asked him. "Your wife, sir, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but she passed peacefully in her sleep 15 minutes ago," Dr. Elliot informed me. I dropped my phone and froze. That was impossible. It couldn't be. Was this some sort of sick joke? A prank call? It felt as if time stood still. Evelyn squeezed me tight. No, it couldn't have been a prank call. It was the hospital's phone number, and Dr. Elliot was my wife's assigned doctor. None besides us could have known that. But she was standing right here. I didn't understand. I put my arms around her instinctually. She was so soft and so smooth, but something was wrong. She was too soft, and she was cold to the touch. I squeezed a little harder, and I felt my fingers dig into her flesh, leaving behind multiple indentations. I looked at her face. "But you're right here," I said to her. I noticed Lily on the couch. She looked confused as well, worried. Evelyn stared blankly back at me. A familiar sense of dread had manifested itself deep within me. She wasn't Evelyn. I pushed her away, struggling to get her arms off me. I reached out and brushed my hand against her face. A sandy white powder stained my hand. It looked to be some kind of makeup. I glanced up at the spot I had just touched on Evelyn's face, and I saw what lay underneath the carefully constructed facade. I felt 1,000 knives stab my heart simultaneously as I realized what I was looking at. It was Clay. No, it wasn't Evelyn at all. It was Claymates. I shouted angrily at the top of my lungs. I shouted at the insult to my wife's legacy that stood in front of me. It filled me with anger. Whatever this thing was, I fully intended to destroy it. I threw a punch at the imposter and recoiled in pain. It was like punching a brick wall. I clutched my bruised hand and took a step back. Claymate looked to Lily and tried forming some sort of expression across its face. My wife's face. Whether it was one of sorrow or of anger, I could not tell. I'm not sure Lily even understood what that thing was. In a stiff and jagged motion, Claymate ran out the back door and out into the garden. It looked like a toddler who had just learned to walk. "Mommy, wait!" Lily shouted and ran after it. I tried stopping her, reaching out to hold her back, but I was too late. Lily was gone. I snapped out of my horror-stricken daze and ran after her. It was dark out. If she had run past the light fixtures of the garden and out into the adjacent woods, there was no way I would be able to find her. I ran out the door and stopped. In the middle of the lawn, Claymate sat bent down on its knees. In front of it stood Lily. Evelyn's face started molding, and she had quickly become unrecognizable. Her limbs began swelling, and it almost seemed like her skin was bubbling. Claymate's entire body started shifting. It grew larger. It burst out of the clothes it was wearing, my wife's clothes. It had returned to its base form, a muddy and crude sculpture of a boy, except it was larger than before. It was roughly the same size as me. It moved its grotesque, sandy mouth and looked as if it was trying to form a vocalization. A series of unnerving gasps and exhales escaped its malleable maw before they started to sound intelligible. "Lily." A deep, growling voice spoke. It sounded like a dog or a parrot trying to mimic human language. It was incredibly off-putting. "Lily." it said again, placing its muddy hand on her shoulder and molding its face into a happy expression. Its features reminded me of a theater mask. Lily screamed in terror and started wailing. I wanted to help, but I felt powerless to do so. Paralyzed with fear, I watched as Lily turned her back to it and attempted to make her escape. She locked eyes with me before she was yanked back. The thing had stretched one of its arms to monstrous proportions and used it as a tendril, wrapping itself around Lily and pulling her back towards itself. "Let me go!" she screamed, begging me to help her. I ran towards the monster, attempting to pry her free from its stone-hard terracotta grip, but it used its other arm to toss me back. I slammed into one of the exterior walls of the house and landed on my back. Wet mud stained my clothes as I rose to my feet and charged the clay monster again. Same result. Claymates started transforming, its form even more contorted and unnatural. Had it been in any other setting, its appearance would almost be comical. I saw Lily struggling to break free from the creature's grasp, and there was nothing I could do. I couldn't get close enough to her. I witnessed in terror as Claymate wrapped itself around her, engulfing her inside a mass of mud and clay. She was trapped inside it. I could see her arms and legs protruding out of the clay, struggling, fighting. She was going to suffocate, and there was nothing I could do. I once attempted to run towards it. My fatherly instincts overcame me, and I felt adrenaline power up my body. I clawed and punched the monster as best as I could, attempting to dig her out. But for each piece of clay I removed, another would take its place. It was in vain, but I had to try. I continued digging, listening to Lily's muffled screams from inside Claymates, only fueled by aggression. I looked back at the house, scanning the ground for anything I could use. A shovel, a big stick, knives, anything. I was desperate. Lily's screams faded, and her protruding limbs suddenly went limp. That's when I noticed it. The garden hose curled up like a snake in the corner of our lawn. I remember how the rain had dissolved Claymate previously, how the water flowed through the being like a winding river. I rushed towards it, fumbling it with shaky hands as I picked it up and aimed it at the big ball of clay that had swallowed my daughter. I tasted a combination of salt and iron on my lips as tears ran down my cheeks. I was so tired, but I had to try. I turned the release valve on the hose, and I felt the hose go taut as water shot through it. I aimed a concentrated beam of high-pressure water directly at the monstrosity occupying my lawn. As soon as the water made contact with the beast, it bellowed in what I could only discern as pain. I relentlessly continued blasting it with water, moving closer and closer. I could see Claymate's gaping face slowly start to melt. Its previously rigid and hard body had turned soft and squishy. Wet brown mud spewed in all directions. Slowly but surely, more and more of Lily's body came into view. The creature attempted to flee, making its escape towards the tree line. Lily laid in the middle of the garden, covered in dirt and wet sand, but free from Claymate's hostage. Suddenly silence filled the air. Claymate was nowhere to be seen, except for the muddy trail it left behind. It had disappeared into the woods, hopefully for good this time. I turned off the hose and tossed it aside. I ran towards Lily and quickly picked her up and brought her inside the house. Before locking the door behind us, I turned around and gazed into the dark forest just a couple of feet away from the lawn. Nothing. No signs of our assailant. I closed the door and called 911. Lily survived. Paramedics were able to resuscitate her or whatever they did to save her life. I wouldn't know because I apparently collapsed from exhaustion shortly after they arrived at our doorstep. I'm not sure how this event will affect Lily going forward. I can't imagine how traumatized she must be. And to top it off with the death of her mother, I'm afraid it will just be too much for her. I have taken a leave from work in order to get things sorted out. I needed a mental break after everything I'd experienced during these past couple of weeks. Lily seems to have returned to normal, at least as normal as life could be after this. Lily hasn't shown any signs of trauma, and she still continues to pursue her artistic hobbies, though it will be hard to say whether these events will have a greater impact in the future. As for Claymate, I don't fully believe he, or it, or whatever you want to call it, is gone. I didn't feel like I killed it that night, only injured it. This was only a minor setback. It needs time to regrow. I don't know what it wants, or what it intended to do with Lily that fateful night. Whatever its plans are, I'm certain they are sinister in nature. This morning, while fetching today's newspaper on the driveway, I glanced over to Isabel and her late husband Greg's house across the street. I now know how she feels every day being a widow. How empty her house must have felt without him by her side anymore. I was lucky to still have Lily at least. Isabel had no one. No kids, no grandkids, and I was pretty sure most of her friends weren't around anymore. I thought about paying her a visit sometime when I suddenly noticed movement coming from the attic window of the house. I rubbed my groggy eyes and focused. Up there, standing by the window, stood a man. An old and disheveled man. It took some time before I connected the dots, but when I finally recognized him, my heart sank. Goosebumps covered my body. It was Greg. Greg stood there staring blankly at me. An all too familiar expression stretched across his face. He slowly raised his hand and placed his palm on the glass. Greg stared at me for a moment and grinned before retrieving his hand and slowly retreating back into the attic. Before I knew it, he was out of view. Gone, vanished. The only trace that remained of him was the muddy handprint he had left stained on the window. Every time I die, the world comes back a little bit clearer. Exactly like it sounds. The first time I died, I hardly noticed the change. I was too busy focusing on other things, like the fact that I was alive and not a wicked red stain on the side of the road. I'd been blasting Britney's Hit Me Baby one more time, and yes, the irony is not lost on me. When out of the corner of my eye, I saw a semi-truck blare past the red light. I barely had time to process what this meant when an awful screeching sound assaulted my senses. Metal tore through metal, and for a fraction of a second, I felt the worst pain I'd ever felt in my life. The driver's side door bulged inwards, tearing into my left rib cage, and my head slammed into the steering wheel, wedging my front teeth up and into my gums. And when I woke up in my bed, sweat-stained and heaving, but perfectly unharmed. I glanced at my phone. Midnight, the 21st. Hadn't yesterday been the 21st? I licked perspiration from my upper lip. Had it all been a dream? If so, the human capacity is way too good at imagining pain. Or I swallowed thickly. What if it hadn't been a dream, but a premonition? I had never believed in that kind of stuff before, but then again, I had never felt such real, visceral pain before either. To be honest, the notion that I had actually died didn't even cross my mind. Not that time. I called in sick to work and ordered Uber Eats, determined to stay away from the wheel for the day. and when the 22nd came and passed, I deemed myself officially truck driver safe and went on with my life. I did notice the world seemed a little brighter, a little more colorful, but I chalked that up to gratitude that I was alive. It wasn't until 18 months later, when I had one too many drinks at my friend Taylor's wedding and decided to mess around and find out in the ocean, that I really noticed the change. Like before, I died painfully. Even now, I can taste the salt water burning in my lungs, can picture the dark nothingness of the sea as it dragged me closer into its stifling embrace. It's an image that gives you relief, but at the same time, I was ecstatic to wake up, safe and dry in my bed. The day had reset to midnight the previous morning, the day of Taylor's wedding. At the reception, I steered clear of alcohol. Like before, the world I had awoken to seemed clearer than before, crisper, more vibrant. Not by a good measure, but noticeable, like changing a YouTube video resolution from 720p to 1080p. Is that Veronica Miller without a drink in her hand? As I googled things like, can your vision improve with age, and do dreams of death make you appreciate life more, one of my college friends, Luke, wandered over. Celebrating an early Lent, I told him. I started to pocket my phone, but he managed to get a glimpse of my search results before I could. Dreams of death? He leaned in. You doing okay, Miller? Could be a lot worse, I said truthfully. Nothing was better than my family finding my bloated body at the bottom of the Pacific. Speaking of which, I cleared my throat. Hey, you haven't had any bad dreams lately, have you? When I had drowned in the ocean yesterday, Luke had been one of the friends who had ran for help. Would he be able to sense that somehow? Luke frowned, thinking. I could see when the bulb inside his mind flashed on, shining light through the Aperol-induced haze. You know what? Yeah. Just last week I woke up in our old psych class, except I hadn't prepared for the final at all, and our professor kept complaining at me because I was naked. And oh, there were 3 clowns in a trench coat lurking over my shoulder. They all had faces like my mother. It was horrifying. Luke grimaced, shuddered a bit. Why are you asking? Oh, no reason, I said. Forget I asked. It wasn't until 3 years later that I realized what I was experiencing was something more intense than dreams or premonitions. That time, it was a freak accident. Bolt of lightning, if you can believe it. What are the odds? Less than 1 million, according to the CDC. Although, since I had died quite a few times, my odds were starting to stack up. Maybe. I'm not actually sure if that math checks out, but again, bigger things to worry about. This time the resolution of the universe jumped from YouTube quality to independent cinema. Lines were crisper, colors more saturated. In a way, it reminded me of Plato's theory of forms. It had been a while since I learned about that in Philosophy 101, but the basic gist is that the world we see, the physical world, isn't the real world but a flattened shadow of true reality. And now, it seemed I was climbing the ladder for a glimpse at that truer reality. The blankets on my bed absolutely embodied the form of a blanket. The scent of my morning coffee was stronger than the inside of a Starbucks. Every apple I tasted was the fullest, reddest apple I had ever tasted, tempting enough to trick Snow White for a second time. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing. That's why the 4th time I died, it wasn't an accident. I didn't know what was happening to me, but I did know that every time I died, I woke up just fine. And every time I woke up, I saw the universe a little bit more as it was. I didn't worry about schematics. I just wanted more. So I borrowed my friend Xanax prescription and popped them into my mouth until my cheeks resembled a squirrel hoarding nuts. This death was a lot less painful than the other deaths, although I wouldn't describe it as pleasant. Still, it was worth it to wake up in Technicolor, like our world had been merged with the color palette of Rainbow Road from Mario Kart. I ate a simple breakfast of oatmeal and berries that morning, and it was better than any Michelin star restaurant I had dined at. The textures of the oats was earthy and pure. I could almost taste the freshness of the wheat stalk it had been milled from. The berries burst in my mouth, an explosion of tart and sweet that was better than any orgasm I had experienced before. And then I decided to play around with that idea a little more, and realized that it wasn't only taste and color that was enhanced. Everything was. I know I should have been content with that, or obviously I didn't know, but I should have. But I wanted more, needed more, craved more. So over the course of the next few weeks, I died as many times as I could. I found overdosing to be the most effective method, but I also played around with carbon monoxide poisoning, diving onto train tracks, hypothermia, and even skydiving without a parachute. I had so much fun with the skydiving method that I did it again the next day just for fun. And with each death, the world came back a little clearer, a little closer to its true form. For the most part, the changes were delightful. It was like I was dosing on shrooms all the time. High on life, for the first time that phrase made sense. It wasn't until around death number 27 that things became a little strange. When I woke up, safely tucked into my bed, I never panicked anymore. I inhaled the scent of the automatic coffee machine cranking out my morning brew. It was incredibly rich and sweet as always, but underneath it, I sensed a different smell, a bitter one. I couldn't place it and assumed the coffee beans were going stale. By death 33, I saw things so clearly that a sweater wasn't just a sweater to me. It was an amalgamation of every tiny strand of fabric threaded together. The sweater was whole, but at the same time, I could see the micro gaps in the cotton itself. It was like that for everything. Or most things. Around death 38, I woke up confused, because the world looked blurrier than usual, like it was overlaid with static. For a moment, I panicked, thinking I had hit the edge of a counter of sorts, and now everything was resetting back to the first level. But when I looked at my door, I could see the wood grain in impeccable detail. I could smell the earthiness of the trees themselves. The blurriness was something else, something deeper. I was starting to see the very fabric of the universe on a molecular level, and I was so intrigued that I barely noticed that the bitter smell lingered everywhere now. Arsenic, cliff diving, toaster in the bathtub. That last one was an awful mistake, especially because pain seemed to be more real. More vivid now, too. But after a dozen more deaths, the blurry shapes started to resemble odd, geometric shapes. Shapes that buzzed and writhed. Shapes that almost resembled the shapes we were taught in geometry. Hexagons, pentagons, 13 pointed stars. But somehow were also completely other. I couldn't have sketched them for you if I tried. Shapes that seemed hostile. I was so obsessed with seeing a clear picture that I ignored my other senses, like the scent of sulfur infiltrating my nostrils, or the pounding of my scared human heart. the sound of constant screaming. Oh sure, I realized that something was wrong. Something was off, but I didn't care anymore. I was a scientist searching for the truth, one horrible death at a time. Bullet to the temple. Black widow bite. Suffocation. I began to hear noises underneath the screaming. They didn't resemble words in any language that I knew, but somehow I understood. Closer, closer, closer. Closer to us. And helplessly I obeyed. The universe was offering me its secrets, and I was determined to know them. And today, after waking up from my 100th death, I've finally succeeded. I looked the universe in the eye, and the universe looked back. And that's why I'm here writing to all of you. My name is Veronica Miller, and I've died 100 times. 100 times in every way imaginable. And now, all I want is a real way out. Please, someone, anyone, tell me how to die for real. I don't know how much time I have, but this time when I die, I need to stay dead. Please. I want to thank everyone who gave me suggestions on how to die, and more importantly, how to stay dead in my last post. If you don't remember me, I'm the girl who had a lot of fun dying until it stopped being so fun and started becoming terrifying. With every death, the universe became a little clearer to me, and now, well, I have a few interesting abilities, like the power to take a sip of apple juice and tell you exactly which tree the apples grew on. I can't enjoy any of it. How can I? Each moment is a sensory nightmare. Every waking moment of every day. The sound of hoarse screaming and demented laughter clogs my ears. Bitterness and rot fill my nostrils. And everywhere I look, God, everywhere I look, I see them. Tangled, demonic-looking creatures the color of television static. Creatures that are watching me, stalking me, waiting for me. Waiting for what? I'm not sure, but I sure as hell don't want to find out. And that's why this time when I die, I need to stay dead. So, starting today, I'm going to keep a log of all the different ways I'll be attempting to die. Of course a log will be futile to me if I do succeed. But if anyone else out there is like me, bless your wretched soul, then perhaps it will be of use to you. Before I start, I will add that before attempting any of the proposed solutions, I did attempt to track down the person who originally killed me, but it ended up being a lot harder than I thought it would be. My town isn't New York City or Los Angeles big, but it's sizable enough that after roaming the streets for days in my little Volkswagen Bug, I was still at square one. I even checked in at all the local truck stops. Although, to be fair, I wasn't coasting off a lot of information. The conversations mostly went something like this. Name of driver? No idea. Appearance? Blurry, but I think white. Maybe, but like tanned white and brown hair. Or maybe sandy blonde. Well, he had hair in any case, unless it was a wig. Right. Plate number? I barely remember if the dude had hair, and you think I remember a license plate? At that point in the conversation, whatever underpaid, overworked cashier manning the gas station would start to get upset. A few of them thought I was playing a practical joke on them for YouTube views, and the less jaded ones thought I was delusional. I'm pretty sure I confirmed that belief at the last gas station, when, in a moment of weakness, I finally snapped at the annoyed cashier and told him that while I might not remember petty details like plate numbers or truck models, I definitely remember the sensation of metal slicing through my rib cage and piercing my lungs. The cashier kicked me out after that. And I decided to give up on that side of the equation altogether. And that leads us to now. I have a pen in hand, a letter titled, "Post to my account in case of death," and a hopeful smile on my face. And since I'm dying to get dying, let's dive in. Death 101. Burn her like a witch. December 1st, 2022, 6:30 p.m. Technically, someone suggested I cremate myself, but it's quite hard to find a mortician willing to do this to someone who is alive. I guess old habits are hard to break, but that's okay. I'm just going to soak my house in gasoline, smoke a Newport to calm myself, and then flick some of the ashes onto the ground. You know, the old-fashioned way to set yourself on fire. Simple enough, right? Okay, let's do this. December 1st, 2022, 12 a.m. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I really wanted that one to work, but honestly, it was a little less painful than I expected. Still really painful, don't get me wrong, but I think that was user error more than anything else. The first 60 seconds were hellish, but after I exhaled enough smoke, I passed out from lack of oxygen, and from there it was just your standard death via suffocation. And honestly, the red-hot flames licking up my calves and melting through my epidermis wasn't even the worst bit. No, the worst part was the way they laughed at me as I burned. They don't have mouths like we do, don't have expressions like we do either, but I can always tell when they're laughing. They make this high-pitched keening noise, like a rabbit bleeding out in an alleyway. Disturbing pieces of crap. Death 102, The Killing Joke. December 4th, 2022, 11:30 p.m. Seeing how difficult it was to find a crematorium, I thought finding a vat of acid to dissolve my entire body in would be equally hard. But after doing a little research online, I realized that acid is a lot more common than you'd think. I thought about pouring a cocktail of chemicals into my bathtub, but after the fire incident, I decided I wanted to treat myself a little instead. I read some horrific tales online about people falling into acidic hot springs, so I used my credit card to book a first-class ticket to a national park that I had always wanted to visit, along with a one-night stay in a luxury hotel. They thought it was luxurious too. The money, of course, will all reset like everything else does once I die, and if it doesn't reset, I won't have to worry about that, or anything else, ever again. Well, time to take a bath, I suppose. December 4th, 2022, 12 a.m. That hurts. Jesus. It was like going to a Korean body scrub if the gloves were made of chicken wire, and if the water they poured over you was battery acid, which would have been fine except for the fact that I'm still here. Sorry. I don't mean to sound heated. It's just, someone said that acid would destroy me on a molecular level. And that sounded really smart, and like maybe it would actually make a difference, and I guess I just let myself hope. And instead, all I got was a whole lot of pain and a little bit more clarity. When I woke up this morning, those things were already gathered on the foot of my bed waiting for me. I always thought they didn't have expressions, but now I'm starting to realize they do. And I don't like that. Not one bit. Death 103. Jesus take the wheel. Although no one suggested another car accident, part of me wonders if dying in a second car accident will somehow complete the cycle or something. I don't know. It sounds improbable, but I'll try anything once. Or twice now, I guess. But at least I've learned from my previous deaths. This time, I'm popping a handful of ibuprofens before I get behind the wheel and... I'm sorry that I stopped the log mid-sentence like that, but I'm putting the death records to rest for now. I have to, because as I was writing that, someone knocked on my door. No, not knocked. Someone pounded on my door so hard that the entire frame shook. For a moment, I actually thought Death 103 was going to be via violent home invasion, and honestly, I was fine with that. I haven't been murdered in that way before, so might as well add it to the log, right? Only when I swung open the door, it wasn't a robber, or a murderer, or a Jehovah's Witness at the door. Instead, it was a tall man with light brown hair and a desperate expression in his eyes. An expression that I recognized clearly, intimately. An expression I saw reflected back at me every time I glanced in a mirror. Without a word, the man stepped into my apartment and shut the door behind him. "You," he said, his voice gruff. "Are you the one who's been looking for me? Are you—" He cleared his throat. "Are you the one I killed?" I work the night shift at Pine Falls Mall doing security. Pine Falls is a funny town to have a mall, considering it's mostly woods. But in the mid-80s, the town saw a large population boom, and the entire downtown was built up as this modern, urban center. Today it's mostly a bunch of offices and other industrial businesses. But the mall is still popular as the only one in town. The mall itself is tucked into the side of the mountains, making it a divisive structure in the community. Some say it's an eyesore that ruins the natural landscape, but I always thought the architecture complemented the scenery well and made a beautiful shopping center, but I digress. The point is, this mall was essentially in the woods. I was night watch and my job was to do occasional rounds and watch cameras. The only other people there were usually the day security people for about an hour until I left, my boss for a bit longer, and the custodians until about 2 a.m. From 2 to 6, the entire property was quiet. My usual duties included doing hourly rounds and watching the camera in between. Every other hour I would begin my rounds where I'd go to several checkpoints and sign a clipboard. There were 6 total on all different areas of the property, and signing them all took me about an hour. 45 minutes if I was quick about it. I would arrive back at my post and wait another hour to do it again. Exciting, right? That night was like any other night. Around 1:30 a.m., my radio rang out with a familiar voice. It was my boss. "Hey, can you come outside for a second?" This shocked me because I thought he had gone home over an hour ago. It was also strange because he didn't specify why or which door. Just to come outside. "Hey Chief, what can I do for you? Which door are you at? I can buzz you in if you need." I replied to no answer. I continued checking the cameras when I saw some lights flicker. The camera was on the west side, which is back entrance of the mall. The door led out to the employee lot. "Can you come outside for a second?" The voice on the radio echoed again. It sounded strange, but I couldn't put my finger on what was so odd about the voice. I was about to unlock the door remotely when the voice came again. "Can you come outside?" It was the same cadence and timbre every time he said it. I watched the camera closely and saw the lights change again, and I noticed they weren't flickering, but instead it was something moving out there. These lights were 8 to 10 feet up, and there isn't much that could block them. "Come outside." My running theory was that someone was trying to get in by faking his voice. I considered putting in a call to the police, but I decided to check out the door for myself first. The door was a short turn and all the way down to the hall. I marched to the edge of the door, Looking out into the dark, I saw a movement at the edge of the lawn. A figure meandering around lazily, facing away from me. He didn't look like a burglar, especially not the kind that would go as far as to copy voices on our radios. I decided the safe thing to do would be call it in, and I dialed the police on my phone. I called the non-emergency line. Pine Falls Police Department, how can I help you? The voice answered. Hi, I'm over at the mall and we've got a suspicious person on the premises. He hasn't really done anything yet, but just to be safe. I was cut off. Hello? The voice questioned. Yes, hi, I'm at the... Again the voice interrupted me. Is anyone there? I hung up. Frustrated and growing fearful, I tried the emergency line. The second I heard the phone pick up, I spouted off. I'm at the mall and we've got a suspicious person. I became aware of the blaring silence on the other line and hung up again. When I looked up, I just about jumped out of my skin. My boss was against the glass. He had one hand awkwardly pressing against the window, and his face was nearly pressed into the glass. His face was emotionless and flat, but his eyes... God, his eyes. They were dark and crooked. As I stared in disbelief, I couldn't exactly figure out what was wrong with them. They looked like an ape's eyes, having a sort of animalistic primal stare. I can still see them in my mind as I type this up. Before I could move out of my paralysis, he spoke. Unlock the door. Please unlock the door. His voice was strange, as if he were trying to speak through a yawn or if he couldn't control his jaw or lips right. Let me in. I need to come inside. His hand gently slapped against the glass, leaving a wet, muddy print. I retreated to my office and locked myself inside. Trying the landline phone, it was also down. I was completely cut off with 3 hours until daylight. I don't know if it was me coming off the adrenaline or just the overall stress, but I fell asleep. What had brought me back was the smell of wet earth. After slowly waking up to the strange smell, I jumped, recalling the events. I checked the cameras to find the door wide open, the first rays of sunlight shining in. My shift was over and I decided to make a run for it, seeing as both phones weren't working. I left a basic version of this note as well as the security footage timestamps so my boss can see for himself what happened. Walking out of my room, I saw the hallway. Muddy handprints and footprints all over the walls, floor, and even ceiling. The smell was so overpowering, like mud and rain. I basically sprinted to my car and sped home. So, that's my story. Update. After last night's post, I got up this morning to a voicemail from my boss claiming the security footage shows nothing but me opening the door after I fell asleep at my post. He's absolutely furious. I think I'm going to call and apologize for sleepwalking. Maybe I'll blame it on a new medication I'm on. I'll post more if anything else happens. Update. Well, I think I can keep my job, but I am on thin ice. I worked last night and my boss stayed for my entire shift making sure I did my job. I was scared all night. I kept thinking I saw something out of the corner of my eye, but nothing else. Update. I got up this morning and went to my car only to find the trunk was wide open and that black earth was everywhere. The thing was in my car. I drove home with it. Who knows where it could be? I searched my entire house like 10 times, but there's no sign of it. I'll edit again if I see it again. Updates. I haven't slept for 2 days. It's raining hard tonight. I'm wide awake, shaking as that smell creeps into my house. I can hear shuffling out in the darkness. Stones moving around in the garden. It's talking and I'm trying so hard not to make a sound. The thing I've noticed about how it talks is this. Humans have a natural ability to pace a sentence. We know when to stop to breathe or naturally pause. This creature can't copy that. It stops between words or talks during a breath. It's very unnatural. No one talks like this thing. I hear it at the door and I feel myself falling asleep. I'm gonna post this as it is and do another update tomorrow morning. I moved into a new house in a new town in a new state. I'm a recently divorced woman and not used to being on my own after 7 years of marriage. Me and my ex never had kids, so it made the process a little easier. I did my best to make sure I put as many miles between us as I could afford. I don't know anyone in town, and my neighbors are pretty quiet. Nobody even welcomed me to the neighborhood, but maybe I'm expecting too much from strangers. The house next door to me looks vacant on the exterior, but I notice lights on through my kitchen window at night that faces the house. I thought nothing of it until my second day there at dusk. I got a knock at my front door. I didn't know who to expect seeing as how nobody is knowing that I'm here. I opened the door, and it was an old man, maybe late 70s or early 80s, greeting me with a friendly smile. Yes? How may I help you?" I said in a friendly but confused manner. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, "but I was wondering if you had any sugar I can borrow. I wanted a hot cup of tea before bed, but I neglected to go to the grocery store." I smiled out of the sheer cuteness of a nice old man borrowing sugar from a neighbor. "No bother at all, sir. If you wait right here, I'll go get you a few cups so you won't have to go to the store so soon." He smiled a little wider and said, "Thank you. It really means a lot to me." I left the door open as he waited for me on the porch to get the sugar. I walked in the kitchen past the window facing his house, and vaguely noticed his light was on. I opened my cabinet and measured out 2 cups of coffee and put it on one of the 3 Tupperware bowls I brought from my last house and sealed it up. I then walked back to the front door. "Here you go, sir." But he was gone. I walked a little further on the porch to look for him and nothing. He wasn't even standing in his yard. I walked over and knocked on his door to see if he still wanted or needed the sugar when I noticed the lights were off in his house. Nobody answered the door. I walked back to my house, kind of worried and kind of irritated at the same time with this man wasting my time. Maybe I'm just frustrated because he was the first smiling face I've seen in a few months, after the divorce I went through. Being needed for something as small as sugar meant the world to me at this time. But regardless, I went back to the kitchen to put the Tupperware bowl in the cabinet in case he came back. When I noticed that the bag of sugar was put back in the cabinet, and the cabinet was closed, I didn't understand. I left out in a hurry to get back to the door. Even the little bit that I spilled on the counter was cleaned up. I paused as I try to remember if I did it before I went back outside, but no, I couldn't have. The next day, I planned to go to the store. As I'm leaving the house, about to get in the car, I was greeted by a lady who told me she lives across the street. She introduced herself and asked me how I was enjoying the neighborhood so far. I told her, "I've only met 2 so far, but you both seem very nice." She then said, "Well, thank you," and asked who the first person I met was. I told her, "The older man who lives next door. He came to borrow sugar last night." Her face turned pale as she stared directly in my eyes for about 2 seconds before she asked, "Which neighbor?" I pointed at the house he lived in, and her breath got labored. She placed her hand on her chest and said, "Nobody lives there anymore. An old man lived there for about 30 years alone. No wife, no kids, just drinking tea in his den." She pointed at the room that faces my kitchen that I see lit up every night and said, In that room there. He would come ask us for sugar every now and then as well. I interrupted. What do you mean he doesn't live there anymore? He just came to my door last night. That den light has been on every night. I said, slightly panicked. But what she said next, I never expected. Sweetie, he died 3 months ago. Before she wished me well and walked away confused. I went back in the house thinking about what she said, and feeling frightened, but not as scared as you'd think I'd be. I'm actually kind of happy that a lonely soul needed a lonely soul like me even after death. Now I keep the sugar out in case the friendly old man ever needs it.